Good evening, colleagues. I would like to welcome everyone here this evening to this special meeting of Newcastle City Council. Call on Councillor Forbes to move the motion on freedom of the city, seconded by Councillor Faulkner.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. It gives me great pleasure to propose two Freedom of the City nominations this evening. The first is Brendan Foster. Brendan was born and raised in the northeast. Tyneside was his training home ground for becoming a celebrated international athlete and regional ambassador, all while teaching chemistry at a local school. Brendan is an Olympic bronze medal winner, world record breaker, Commonwealth Games silver medalist, and former European champion. Brendan is also equally accomplished off the athletics track and field. Today, his recognisable voice is instantly known to people around the world as a BBC sports commentator, and he's one of the best known athletic personalities in the country. Brendan combined his ambition to be a world-class runner with a job in his local community. He's always been quick to generate opportunities that promote grassroots sport and understands the importance of training facilities in nurturing talent and raising participation. On retiring from sport, he brought together a group of friends who conceived the idea of a Great North Run, which has since become the world's largest half marathon, taking place every year with runners from Newcastle to South Shields. By 2014, the race had been run by more than 1 million competitors and regularly attracts more than 56,000 participants. Many members will remember the extraordinary commemorative celebrations we had on the quayside about 18 months ago to mark the fact that the Great North Run was the first event of its kind in the world to have achieved 1 million runners. It's estimated that Great North Run brings a direct economic impact of nearly £16 million annually to Newcastle, and runners and spectators provide a welcome boost to local businesses and hotels, but more importantly raise millions of pounds every year for charities. Doing the Great North Run is, for many people, one of the rites of passage within the region. The event is also an opportunity to showcase the potential of Newcastle to international investors and developers. And the pictures of our region and our city, broadcast all over the world during the run, are probably the most national and international exposure we receive on a regular basis. What distinguishes Brendan are his values and commitment to Newcastle and the North East. His resolve to bring great sporting events to the region has captured the public's imagination, regenerated training venues, inspired ordinary people to exercise, and encouraged the next generation of athletes to pursue their dreams. And Brendan shows no signs of slowing down. He points out that the Great North Run remains more popular than both the New York and London marathons. The Great North brand now applies to a range of sporting events, offering amateurs the opportunity to compete in the same events as professional athletes and have fun raising money for charity at the same time. He's a true champion and ambassador for his sport and our city, and I would ask Council to confer upon him freedom of the city in recognition of this. And Sir Terry Farrell, Lord Mayor, is an eminent British architect and urban designer who's widely considered to be the UK's leading architect planner. Sir Terry was brought up and educated in Newcastle, where he attended St Cuthbert's High School and graduated with a degree from Newcastle University. In 1980, he founded his own company, Terry Farrell and Partners, and was responsible for the regeneration of Newcastle Quayside during the 1990s. He's the inspiration behind many of our most iconic buildings, such as the International Centre for Life and the Great North Museum. The formative years Sir Terry spent in Newcastle have fostered a lasting commitment to the city, and he's currently working with us on designs for Northumberland Street. His designs have achieved worldwide acclaim. Notable commissions include MI6, a Home Office headquarters, As design and planning leader for the Thames Gateway, he oversees the largest regeneration project in Europe, and his work has an international reach. The British Consulate General in Hong Kong, Incheon International Airport in Seoul, and Beijing's South Railway Station, which is the largest in Asia, were all designed by Sir Terry. And his KK100 tower in Shenzhen is the tallest building ever designed by a British architect. He's currently advising the Department for Transport on HS2. A prominent contributor to strategic planning issues, the government recently invited Sir Terry to undertake a national review of architecture and the built environment. His review addresses some of the key issues of our time: how we go about building enough homes, design spaces that people want to live, work and spend time in, protect our cultural heritage, look after the environment, and ensure places are less susceptible to the effects of climate change. Sir Terry's work recognises that the built environment influences the way that we live our lives and is central to our health and well-being. He advocates empowering cities and localities to plan developments that are fit for the 21st century, sustainable, and enhance quality of life for existing and future generations. Sir Terry, Lord Mayor, has been a loyal patron of Newcastle, and he intends to leave a permanent legacy through his new association with Newcastle University. Freedom of the City will be a fitting tribute to a man who has left a lasting impact on his home city, recognising one of our own who has left his mark on a global scale. I therefore ask Council to agree to confer the Freedom of the City on both Brendan Foster and Sir Terry Farrell. Thank you.
Could I ask Councillor Faulkner to second the motion for Brendan Foster?
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I asked Councillor Lower if she would mind if I did this, because I've known Brendan Foster for more than 20 years, and I exited the Constitutional Committee when his nomination was discussed to make sure that these things were proper. I just ask members, and some of you will remember this very clearly, to cast your mind back to 1974 at Wembley, the FA Cup final against Liverpool, where Newcastle really thought we were going to win it. And immediately before the cup final, Brendan Foster was invited. He was a pretty well-known runner then, successful runner, British record holder, to take part in an international race around Wembley. He borrowed a black and white running vest from his mate David Bedford and beat everybody who was in that race, a particular rather prominent Finn at the time. Sadly, that was the only thing we got out of that day, but I remember it very clearly. And what it reminded me is that although Brendan has been particularly associated in a sporting sense with Gateshead, he was a Gateshead Harrier, he was Director of Sport at Gateshead Council, of course. Nonetheless, he's a Newcastle supporter, he's been going since 1955, he wears the black and white with pride. So it kind of occurred to me that just like the Great North Run itself, for Brendan Foster, it starts in Newcastle. So very pleased to support that. He won a bronze medal at the Olympic Games in the days when we won nothing. It's not like now where we win 30 gold medals. It was quite extraordinary, his achievement. He became Sports Personality of the Year. So it's very appropriate that there are two other Geordies who are both Sports Personalities of the Year, Geordie associates, Jonathan Edwards and Johnny Wilkinson, who are sports personalities and honorary freemen of the city. So it's very appropriate, I think, that this evening we should have Brendan Foster joining them. So I'm very happy to second the leader's proposal.
Do you have any contributions on this particular motion? Does the Council agree to confirm? We'll get to it. To confirm the freedom of the city on Brendan Foster. Could I ask Councillor Lower to speak?
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I don't want to say much to add to what Councillor Forbes has already said. I think it's great that Sir Terry Farrell was born in Cheshire, but came to this city as a youth and attended what was then St Cuthbert's Grammar School, as a lot of good Catholics in this establishment have also done. There are a lot of them here, and I think that some of his designs have been fantastic, not only in the city, but the work that he's done internationally and nationally, and the fact that he's also still working with us on Northumberland Street. Don't want to cover all the things he's done. I mean, he was awarded the CBE in 1996 and he became a Knight Bachelor in 2001. But I think the most important thing is that he's actually developing strong links with Newcastle University still. And the new association, he sees as leaving a permanent legacy for the city and for the future. And I think that is something that we should acknowledge, and I think he thoroughly deserves this award. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Does anyone wish to contribute to the debate? No. Does the Council agree to confirm the freedom of the city on Sir Terry Farrell, CBE? Thank you. We now go back to the monthly meeting. We move on to the agenda for the business for the ordinary meeting of the Council. Apologies for absence.
Point of order on the minutes. Could I raise a point of order on the minutes?
Chair, the next item is the minutes. This is the apologies. We'll come to the minutes.
Apologies.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. We've had apologies from Councillors Ainsley, Allison, Bartlett, Breaky, Jones, Leggett, Mendelson, O'Brien, Pearson, Karen Robinson, Rahman, Walker and Wright.
Councillor Stone. Councillor Stone.
We're on the minutes now. Yeah. Yes. Could I raise a query on this point 73 on the minutes on top of page 5? At the last meeting, Councillor Stockdale, it was understood that Councillor Stockdale would report back on Elsic Paul outside the meeting. I've had a look at his report and I can't see it mentioned, so I was wondering if he has actually reported back yet.
We don't have any further information. Could we ask Councillor Stockdale if he could make a comment on this, please?
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I'm picking that up in my Cabinet report a little bit later on, but I understood last Council that the response had been provided already in writing, so I think there was a procedural error in terms of me being called to respond to it verbally.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Sorry, I didn't hear. On page 5, records that Councillor Kemp asked Councillor Kane to send him detailed questions. I sent the question through. As far as I'm aware, I apologise if I've missed the answer, but I don't think I've had one. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Please. Couldn't hear what you were saying, Councillor.
Noted, and they will be sent, Lord Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Are there any more comments on the minutes of the meeting held on the 6th of January 2016? Does the Council agree the minutes other than those which have been raised? Thank you. Official announcements. On behalf of the Council, I would like to offer condolences to the families and friends of former Conservative Councillor Bill Weeks, who passed away on the 26th of January 2016. As well as being a councillor, Bill was a journalist, television food expert, radio broadcaster, a lecturer in agriculture at Newcastle University and a member of the Showman's Guild. I will now ask Council to stand for a minute's silence as a mark of respect. Thank you, colleagues. This meeting marks the first formal meeting of Council in what is now the 800th year of the Morality, created by King John in February 2016. 1216. There's only 799 years difference. I know that some members were able to attend the service of Thanksgiving at St Nicholas's Cathedral last night to launch the celebration and mark this historic landmark for one of the oldest surviving civic institutions in the city. The service was the first of a range of events which will be rolled out during the 800th year until February 2017. Going forward, other events associated with the anniversary include an educational programme for Newcastle schools pitched at key stages 2 and 3, delivered by Tyne and Wear Archives and Museums, an exhibition at the City Library focusing on the 1216 Durham Magna Carta, and subsequent key stages in the city's civil life, and a programme of talks and lectures starting with Local History Month in May. Moving on. Stonewall, the lesbian, gay and bi, trans, LGBT equality charity, has recently named Newcastle City Council as a top 20 employer in its top 100 employers list for 2016, making us the best in the North East and second for all UK councils. Congratulations to all involved, a great achievement. Finally, and for information, members may be interested to know that Professor Chris Brink, Vice-Chancellor of Newcastle University since 2007, has announced that he will retire at the end of December 2016. Through his leadership, the university is now world-renowned for its work around ageing, sustainability and science. Petitions. We have received 4 petitions this month. Firstly, I'll invite Councillor Cott to present the first one regarding traffic problems at, where is this? Prices Meadow. I thought it might be Prince.
It's Prince's Meadow, Lord Mayor.
Right, yeah.
Thank you very much. Yes, I have a petition here signed by residents in Prince's Meadow and Lanesborough Court, and it says, "We, the undersigned, request that Newcastle City Council takes action to address problems of parking in Prince's Meadow. Parking is causing inconvenience and obstruction. We're concerned about the road safety implications. The problem is getting worse."
Thank you, Councillor. Can I call upon Councillor Kemp, the Cabinet Member, to respond?
The problems with parking in Prince's Meadows were raised as far back as 2009. Indiscriminate and obstructive parking on the estate has been addressed through the installation of double yellow lines at the junction with Emble Hope Drive in 2010 and near Lanesborough Court in 2013. In 2012, residents requested the introduction of permit parking in Princess Meadows to deter parking by commuters and visitors to St Nick's Hospital. A new request to undertake further investigation was received via the West Gosforth Ward councillors in November 2015, and as a result of this, further parking surveys will be carried out in February 2016. Should the 85% level be met, which is a requirement to actually trigger, a public consultation exercise will be undertaken to determine whether there is a clear community support for such measures. In accordance with the agreed criteria, a scheme can only progress when less than 34% of residents object to it. So once the results of the parking surveys are received, full details will be received to the ward councillors.
Thank you, Councillor. The second petition is about fly tipping at communal recycling points and will be presented by Councillor Kane.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. The petition reads, "We, the undersigned, We, the undersigned, are unhappy with the state of communal recycling points at YHM blocks, as they generate litter and attract fly tipping. The situation has got steadily worse in recent months. We call upon Newcastle City Council and YHM to urgently tackle the design of all communal recycling points to contain wind-blown waste and prevent fly tipping, and to provide clear instructions as to what should and shouldn't be left there. I should add, probably, Lord Mayor, that we have made some progress since the petition was started, so it is moving forward.
Thank you, Councillor. Can I call upon Councillor Kemp, the Cabinet Member responsible, to respond?
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Thank you, Councillor Kane, and thank you for acknowledging the progress. It will shortcut a lot of what I was going to say, so I'll really just get to the next steps following on from the progress. You have a group which is scheduled to reconvene on the 9th of February 2016 to discuss actions and points and a look at the action plan and delivery plan. Councillor Kane, you'll be invited to this meeting. The YHM 2016 capital programme was agreed at Cabinet and no further funding is available for additional environmental schemes. YHM will launch a participatory budget in 2016 which will enable councillors and tenants to submit ideas to draw on this with potential funding streams. But I can advise you that a further update will be provided properly following the meeting on the 9th of February, detailing actions available.
Thank you, Councillor. The third petition is about funding for mayors.
Have we agreed to accept it?
Could we agree to accept the motion? Both of them. Thank you, councillors. The third petition is about funding for mayors, an organisation which helps elderly and vulnerable people to stay in their own homes, and will be presented by Councillor McCarthy.
Thank you very much, Lord Mayor. I do think democracy is wonderful when I'm presenting a petition to one of my Cabinet colleagues. This has come in, Lord Mayor, from a resident in my ward, and the petition reads as follows. We, the undersigned, ask the Council to reconsider cutting the funding for mayors, an organisation which helps the elderly and vulnerable people to stay in their own homes, by supplying handymen for small repair jobs and a trades register for larger jobs. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I call upon Councillor Kilgar, Cabinet Member, to respond.
Thank you, Lord Mayor, and thank you to the residents who've organised and signed the petition. We do recognise that the handy person service is valued by residents, but sadly, given the scale of government-imposed cuts, we're having to make difficult decisions about which non-statutory services we continue to deliver. We fully acknowledge that mayors support some of the most vulnerable residents in the city, and we have worked with mayors over the past 3 years to help them move to a more self-funded and sustainable way to deliver their services. This included a review of their charging arrangements and opportunities to explore new delivery and funding models, including social enterprise. National information shows that charging for handy person services is being reviewed across the country, and information shows us that those increases, while certainly not desirable, have not deterred take-up. Caring Hands, who also provide a handy person service, were successful in round 6 of the Newcastle Fund and have been awarded £23,250 for 2016-17. Whilst the award does not entirely mitigate against this budget proposal, I would like to reassure residents that there will still be some capacity for the provision of support for older people to enable them to live independently. I'm happy to receive the petition on behalf of the Council as part of our budget consultation process, Lord Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Does Council agree to receive the petition? I would now like to welcome back to Council we have the final petition. The last petition will be presented by Councillor Huddard on behalf of ward residents regarding litter on Chillingham Road, adjacent back lanes. I call upon Councillor Huddard.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. This is a petition about litter. I'll read it out. It says, we are concerned at the increasing problem of litter on Chillingham Road shopping area and adjacent back lanes. In addition to dropped litter, waste bins are often overflowing, and at weekends the problem is considerably worse. We ask that the Council reviews the frequency of current street cleaning arrangements, the effectiveness of current enforcement measures, and reinstates the sweeping and bin emptying programme on weekends.
Thank you, Councillor. Call upon Councillor Kemp, Cabinet Member, to respond.
I'll apologise, Lord Mayor, my response is probably somewhat longer than the petition. Chillingham Road is mechanically swept every day, Monday to Friday. Litter bins on Chillingham Road are emptied Monday, Wednesday and Friday. The 2013 budget confirmed the removal of weekend cleansing activities with the exception of the city centre. There is currently a review of city-wide litter bins, and it's proposed to replace existing litter bins with larger volume containers, which will increase capacity and encourage greater uptake on street recycling. In 2015, North Heaton Council has authorised additional sweeping and litter bin activities on Saturdays, I understand. I believe that Councillor Huddart requested and has been supplied with revised costs for this service to be provided again this year. My understanding that this has not yet been replied to. With regards to the issue of enforcement, as I illustrated in my Cabinet report to Council last month, government statistics show that Newcastle City Council did the second highest number of prosecutions for waste crimes such as fly tipping in the UK and the highest outside of London. Our officers work 7 days a week enforcing local environmental quality offences. All police officers and police community support officers have a range of powers to deal with littering offences and provide a 24/7 service 365 days of the year. This authority has a zero-tolerance approach to street littering. In the vast majority of cases, those who are fined have been who are actually at court are cooperative and are given the opportunity to simply pay a fixed-term penalty charge, which they do. In 2014-15, the authority issued 2,832 fixed penalty notices for littering in the city, with 83.5% of the penalties paid to the authority and 99.6% recovered through the court service at magistrates. So far in 2015-16, we've issued over 2,300 fixed penalty notices for littering in this fiscal year. We have also started 617 prosecutions for environmental offences. The City Council is currently undergoing budget consultation for further budget cuts to services and simply cannot afford to reinstate weekend working arrangements. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Does Council agree to receive the petitions? You might have noticed the disjointed way in which this was put forward, but initially we had intended to ask for agreement after the 4 had been put forward, but because of the animated actions of the first 2 members to have their petitions received, this went by the board.
I do apologise.
Yeah, no problem. You weren't to know. Right, a presentation now, Northumbria Police and Crime Commissioner and Chief Constable. I would like to welcome back to Council Vera Baird, the Police and Crime Commissioner, and also welcome Steve Ashman, the Northumbrian Police Chief Constable. Each will give a short presentation on crime and community safety issues in Newcastle, and I will then invite questions from members. Welcome.
Lord Mayor, City Councillors, thank you very much indeed for inviting me back again. And I am going to be brief because I think the star of the show is our new Chief Constable, Steve Ashman, who you will have seen, you'll see tonight for the first time speaking to you. We brought with us Chief Superintendent Laura Young, who is the area commander for Central Command, which covers this city. So she has come to help us. I think what I would like to say is probably about 3 very brief things. And the first thing is that my role as Police and Crime Commissioner, which gives me a statutory obligation to seek to keep safe the community, to limit crime by helping prevention, the role of ensuring that the police deliver what the public require of them, and I have to consult and make sure that I have a plan which clears that and sends it on to the Chief Constable to do. The statutory obligation to improve the criminal justice process as best one can, and my further obligation now to look after victim services. All of those cannot be done without good partnership working with the local authorities. And I thank Newcastle City for its help and its support and its cooperation from top to bottom, frankly, in my work. Let me give you just a couple of quick examples. Yesterday, people are apprised of the importance of tackling antisocial behaviour. It's very sporadic, it's not everywhere, but it is awfully undermining, and it reduces quality of life wherever it appears. Yesterday, I was with Councillor Kemp on the establishment of a network of volunteers, some of whom have gone through antisocial behaviour themselves, all of whom have been trained to understand its undermining impact, who have come forward and are ready to help people who are currently suffering from it to cope and to recover from the impact of it. The police do a great deal about antisocial behaviour. The housing services do. Many other parts of the council do. But in addition to that, there is now a body of people who we have got together to bring on, who will give that personal one-to-one support that's so important when you are being undermined, probably in your home, and it's very hard to escape from it. I would also like to say, crime prevention-wise, legal highs have been in the press recently, and rightly, as a cause of concern. Earlier last year, the local authority saw, as the police saw, that there were an enormous number of legal highs related incidents coming to their attention, more than in most other places. And it was, again, partnership working. I could fund, the council could organise, and Northumbria University could carry out an excellent piece of citywide research to ascertain the nature of the trade, the nature of the marketing, and probably most sinisterly, the nature of the people to whom those were being marketed, which essentially is vulnerable young people who are either in care or have just come out of care and don't have around them the comfortable embrace of parents and family. They are the market that was being targeted. Therefore, that research led us to be sure we had to take powerful joint action. We called a conference, and we have worked out a citywide strategy to tackle legal highs, and you may well have seen some of the more dramatic bits of it in the press recently. The police have closed 3 suppliers, and a good deal more is going on underground. So those things could not have been done without the help of the council, and the partnership is very, very much valued. Let me turn briefly to funding, and if I can, link what I've just discussed with funding more generally. The council is at this stage when cuts are going to be enormously damaging to all local authorities, and cuts to police are still very grave, whatever you may have heard the Chancellor of the Exchequer say. It was a very brave, and it is now clearly a very wise thing for this local authority to have led the way with the late night levy, because it will make sure that our important nighttime economy, a great boost to the city's business, a very enjoyable experience for a lot of people, and actually a great recruiter to our universities, as they make very clear to me that is safely policed now and safely run, and that is a tribute to the extra funding that the partners in the city have willingly contributed through the levying of the late night charge on them by the council. It's very voluntarily given. I make sure I see the businesses every year and appreciate that they are content with what is going on. Compare and contrast a couple of other cities nearby who are not, for instance, going to be able to afford taxi marshals now because local authority cuts are going to bite away at all of these safeguarding tools, and yet there will still be that safety around the city centre here because of the late night levy. Again, a joint piece of working, because the funding as to 2/3 comes to the police and we use it in that late night arena. Funding more broadly then is in a sad state. It is not the case that there have been no cuts to policing in this spending round at all. The situation is that there will be no reduction in spending power for the police only if every police commissioner in the country increases the precept by the maximum they are required to do. We have the lowest precept in the country at £88 for a Band D property, and I have been given the opportunity, which is really a compulsion, to levy an extra £5 on the public here, in order to safeguard, and let me make very clear, if I don't do it, there are cuts. The trajectory of police officers, we have lost 900 since the peak in 2009. The trajectory of police officers is going down and down and down, and it will continue at a steep rate. But this will help slow it, and so it must be done. I was delighted that the Police and Crime panel, which consists of councillors, 2 from here and a lot from other local authorities, unanimously supported the inevitability of that happening, because we must keep our excellent police on the streets. Northumbria Police have a 92% public satisfaction rate. They are the best in the country. And I've no doubt that the new Chief Constable is going to be able to build on the platform that Sue Sim left behind of excellent performance and to make things even better. He's a local man with a family link to policing here, but he's had the wisdom to go to the Met and see what it's like in a large force, to go and work in Cleveland to see what it's like in a small one, and now with that abundance of experience, he's here to head up our force and to take it forward to even greater achievements. But it is an excellent police force, and I am delighted to be its Police and Crime Commissioner, and I thank you again for the joint work that you do to make us as effective as we are. And now can I hand over to Steve Ashman.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Well, good evening, Lord Mayor. Thank you very much for the invitation this evening, and to members in front of me. And I'm grateful for the very warm introduction that my Police and Crime Commissioner has given me there. The wisdom of going to the Met is not quite a phrase that some people have said to me in the past, but nevertheless I do recognise it, certainly in terms of the opportunity to gain experience of other policing environments. And one thing that almost 29 years of policing in 3 different forces across the country has taught me is that I've yet to come across any community group or indeed group of partners or elected members who are convinced by me standing in front of them and talking about statistical variations in crime numbers, be they up or be they down. But I will give you some of that headline information for yourselves here in Newcastle, because I think it is particularly relevant, and I know it is sought after in many quarters. The raw information, put simply, and I'll put it as simply as I can, and please don't take that as any slight upon your good selves, but the very subject matter of crime data and statistical variations in crime data is incredibly and increasingly complicated and complex for people to understand. It confuses the living daylights out of me, and I try my very best to try and explain that to any forum that I speak to. But put as simply as I can, the number of times that the public in Newcastle telephone Northumbria Police and say, I have been a victim of crime, is down by almost 10% so far this year compared to last year. Where it becomes confusing, if I then tell you that the number of crimes that we have recorded as a result of those is up 22% compared to last year, then he could be forgiven for thinking, what on earth is he talking about? What we have done and what we have pushed very hard on, certainly since I came into the office of Chief Constable in the summer of last year, is to be absolutely rigorous in our adherence to the National Crime Recording Standards, and that's important for a number of reasons. One, it gives us a true picture of what crime actually is taking place across the Newcastle area and indeed the Northumbria area, but secondly, to give the public increased confidence that we will take their concerns most seriously to us. There are a lot of occasions when the public will ring and will report that they are a victim of crime, and upon investigation they have not been a victim of crime. There are a huge number of those, and I'd be here until midnight if I tried to explain to you exactly what type of categories I'm talking about. But suffice to say, what we are seeing is, I think, a growing confidence in the public and the communities of the Northumbria area and what Northumbria Police are doing, and an increasing and growing confidence, particularly in areas concerning sexual offences and violence against vulnerable people. And I do believe that's born out of a lot of the very proactive operations that we have launched in recent times, many of which have been done in partnership with your good selves. As I say, though, I think what's most important is the perception of people, the perception of community groups about crime. And the Commissioner touched upon legal highs. or no new psychoactive substances, to give them the title which is being thrown around nationally at the moment. And I think that is a good example of where the Northumbria Police have been able to work very closely with Newcastle City Council in tackling what is a growing problem, and it is a problem, and you'll have seen the coverage of a new task force that's been set up within the Newcastle area to tackle these problems. It seems to be concentrated in the city, I have to say that, I don't know why. There are problems elsewhere in the Northumbria area, but we seem to have some concentration of it in the Newcastle area, and tackle it we will. I think it is a growing problem, and I fully support the pushes for increased legislation around that. We continue also to have, I suppose, the position, whether it's a good thing or not, it is a position that we hold in relation to a focal point for protest across the North East. And there are some examples of that in recent weeks, and I'm sure, and I'm more than happy to answer questions on that. And I know there are some very real concerns which I share, and I know the Commissioner shares as well, in relation to some proposed protests that may be coming our way. But I'm quite happy to answer any questions that people might have on that as best as I possibly can. As you've heard, we are the best force in the country, and it's nice to be able to stand here and say that in relation to satisfaction and confidence, and that means that when people are victims of crime, they tell us that the service that they get and the confidence that they have in Northumbria Police is higher here. It's into the 90s in just about every indicator of that survey that you care to look at, and that's very, very positive and something that we want to hang on to. The challenge, though, of providing this level of service continues, and it continues to grow, as indeed that challenge exists for many public services who've been through the period of austerity that we have all been through in this room. It's particularly so in the arena of protecting vulnerable people and dealing with sexual exploitation against vulnerable people. And you note that I don't just mention children there, because there are a number of vulnerable adults who equally deserve our support and the best service that we can provide to them. And I'm happy to stand here and give you that commitment that we will do everything that we possibly can to improve the service and get it to the highest standard that is achievable in relation to protecting vulnerable people. It is, and the Commissioner and I speak as one on this, and indeed she shares my resolve in tackling this as an absolute priority, to the extent that we are putting disproportionate resources into that area of policing, and have done for some time, and we will continue to do so. That's why issues such as the rise in precept is particularly important if we're going to sustain that. You will have heard of Operation Sanctuary. I mention that name, and I do so with a warning, first of all, that I would ask that that is not repeated, and what I say about Operation Sanctuary is not repeated or reported in any way, shape or form outside of this room. That is because there are a number of trials taking place at the moment in which there are very stringent reporting restrictions that the judge has placed upon it. Operation Sanctuary continues, and it will continue beyond this current series of trials, and I'm absolutely committed to making sure that the very good start that we made in relation to Sanctuary over the last few years, which has been wholeheartedly supported by this local authority at the very, very top, and indeed throughout, in terms of the commitment and energy that's gone into that, and the resources. I've never yet have to ask for anything twice from Newcastle City Council, and that's a very pleasing position to be in. As the Commissioner pointed out, we have seen the largest reductions percentage-wise of any force in the country, of any of the 43 forces in England and Wales. Over 900 officers and well over 900 essential support staff have gone in recent years. The total budget cut equals 26% in real terms over a 5-year period that we've taken out, and well over £100 million from our budget, which is quite an eye-watering figure. We've always sought to try and protect the front line in everything that we do, and you have my commitment that I will try to do that. But the simple fact of the matter is we've had to look at new ways of working. We've invested heavily in technology. We've almost completed the rollout of handheld devices for all police officers, all operational police officers in the Northumbria area, that will keep them out on the streets and away from police stations as much as is humanly possible. And it also improves the effectiveness and the efficiency of most of our operating systems. These challenges are not over for us. It's still the last year of cuts from the last comprehensive spending review. We have rationalised our estate. We've sold a huge number of police stations, And there is, of course, still the issue of our headquarters site at Ponteland that we are looking to release as well. We have, wherever possible, shared with other partners. We've done a lot of collaborative work with Newcastle City Council and indeed with other local authorities. We're sharing 9 buildings with fire and rescue services across the force area, and we'll continue to look excuse me, for other opportunities to collaborate wherever possible to improve our efficiencies. And we have the lowest overtime spend nationally of any police force. So we have cut and tried to lean ourselves as much as we possibly can. Despite that, I think that perhaps the best way I can close to you all is to say that I'm extremely proud to be the Chief Constable of my home force, a force that my family have served in, and my immediate family have over 100 years' experience in serving this force and these communities. I'm extremely upbeat about the future. You might expect me to say that, but genuinely I am, and I'm absolutely determined that I will lead a workforce that is proud of what they do, proud of who they are, and of the communities that they serve. And I think now, more than ever before, is a time to be proud to be a public servant. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chief Constable. We now open the floor for questions. And could I suggest that we have questions and not statements? Councillor Lowe.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Slight statement. I just want to say thank you to the new Chief Constable for coming along and to the Commissioner for her comments. I actually have a question for the Commissioner. Oh, sorry. I was just wondering if you'd actually responded to the Louise Casey letter on bringing together as one nation about the extremism strategy. And
sorry, could you say that again? Would I
the
respond?
Louise Casey letter that came out.
Oh, yes.
Did you respond? Can I ask, did you respond to that?
We haven't responded yet. No.
You haven't. And I just wondered if you had any views on the new counter-extremism strategy proposals, in particular the extremism community trigger and the role that would be put onto councillors and councils in that respect.
I think that's something that really needs to be proceeded with caution, and it needs to be done in cooperation with councillors and only with their full buy-in to it, because otherwise you can drive artificial barriers amongst communities rather than improve them. So I think it does need to be done with a great deal of care. But I wouldn't be against it, because I do think that councillors of all political stripes are very well enmeshed into their communities and can be a really key resource for improving community integration and well-being. So I certainly don't reject it at all. I think it's got to proceed with caution. Steve might have a view, actually, too. I don't know if he does, from an operational vantage point.
No, I would concur with what the Commissioner said. I think it's early days in relation to that, and I think there's a lot of consultation still to take place in terms of what the implications would be operationally for police forces. I'm sorry if that sounds like a bit of a fudge, but there's not a great deal more I can add.
I just want to put on record our thanks to the Chief Superintendent, Young, who has made a big difference to us, because although she covers the city centre, has made a great contact with her staff, with outlying communities, and it's really made a difference, and we're seeing some continuation with policing in the outlying areas, which has made great progress. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
She's fantastic. I really agree with you. I'm very pleased that 2 out of the 3 of our area commanders are women, and Laura's a star.
Councillor Higgins.
Yes, thank you very much, Lord Mayor. Well, first of all, I don't intend to make a lengthy statement, but I think it would be appropriate for me just to say a thank you for the tremendous work that the police do in the Benwell and Scotswood area, particularly in relation to community policing. And if we are doing name checks, I know we did name check, then I feel I should mention Sergeant Kelly Hetherington, who is particularly active and does some really excellent work down there. But my question actually is on something different, slightly different, and at the risk of sounding like Jeremy Corbyn, it's actually raised by a member of the public. And we recently, of course, had the Holocaust Memorial Week, which I think made us reflect on many issues to do with intolerance and the events leading up to the Holocaust. But I noticed that on the weekend before, and it was probably timed to be in the run-up to the Holocaust Memorial, there was a demonstration that was reported in the press at the monument where, from what I've read here, I didn't actually witness it, where a group of uniformed men and women stood in front of Gray's monument with banners saying, "Immigrants not welcome," and Hitler was right. And a member of the public wrote in the newspaper about this that he was somewhat surprised that no arrests were made at the time. And he's implying almost tacit approval by the police, which I'm sure is just not the case. That's an ill-advised comment. But I just wondered, the fact is that we are a multicultural city. I think it's important that we do preserve that. In the run-up to the elections, it may well be we have similar activities again, whether the police has a view about how these can be addressed in the future.
Certainly, I'm happy to answer that. I think what I would say is please don't read anything into whether or not arrests were made on the day. It is often the case that on the day in question is not the right moment to be making those arrests, and it's better for us to be doing that after the event. So please don't read too much into that, would probably be my initial response. I think that we have, I think, a proud tradition in this area of policing protests. Certainly we're very proud of our recent record in how we've approached some quite difficult and challenging protests. And it is a fine line, there's no two ways about it. There are many occasions when we have to police protests where people are expressing a point of view that individually for police officers is very difficult for them to accept. They are human beings, they have their own views, and they have their own outlook on life. And it's not too dissimilar to most members of the public, I hasten to add. But nevertheless, we have to act impartially and within the law and uphold the rule of law. Having said that, there are limits, and there are limits to what we will accept. There are a wide range of very flexible powers that are open to us, and we look at every single occasion where we're notified of a protest and see whether or not there is likely to be a disproportionate impact upon some communities by another section of a community from either locally or indeed nationally exercising their right to peaceful protest. And where necessary, we do have powers at our disposal, and we will use them. And I'm absolutely clear with those officers that command such operations. My direction is absolutely clear. If offences are apparent, if I believe that the impact of one person exercising their right or one group exercising their right to free speech is going to disproportionately impact upon another, then we'll act upon it. And if it goes so far as to infringe upon the law and the statute, then we will absolutely act upon it, and you have my assurance that that will be the case.
Thank you. Councillor Forbes.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Firstly, can I welcome Steve's appointment as Chief Constable. He and I work very closely together in his former role, and I know that we have very strong working relationships between the Council and Northumbria Police, which are valued immensely by both partners. Can I also place on record my thanks to Laura and her fantastic team in the city. The work that they do is really vital to our communities. And that leads me on to my question. We know that there are big cuts facing all of us, and as you've highlighted, Vera, the police as well. What impact do you think those cuts are likely to have on neighbourhood policing and community policing, which I know we all hold dear as a model which we really value and appreciate in the city? And if I could also ask Vera a separate question around your view around the current Home Office consultation around transfer of fire and rescue responsibilities to police and crime commissioners in future. I know that there are some concerns about how that might work in our area, and a wish, if possible, to, as Steve has said in his talk, make sure that we're working collaboratively together, but that doesn't necessarily mean whole-scale mergers. And it'd be good to get your position at the moment on that, on the record. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. I'll just mention neighbourhood policing and then invite Steve to say more on that, and then I'll just pop back and answer your question on fire. But I mean, we have both the last Chief Constable and Chief Constable Ashman and I have set out our stall to protect neighbourhood policing, and we will. As long as it's possible to do that, we will put the cuts everywhere else except neighbourhood policing, because it's hugely important. It is a huge confidence builder. It is where lots and lots of intelligence, Councillor Lower asked me about counter-terrorism, lots and lots of intelligence comes through neighbourhood policing. People get friendly with their PCSOs, they can talk easily to them, they're in the libraries and so on, and so much comes through, and much goes back both ways. Lots of crime prevention done just by having these folk really very integrally involved in the community. So you know some of the things we've done that the Chief Constable's mentioned. We've had to cut out old, heavy police stations that cost an enormous amount to fund and put police officers in leasehold premises that are a lot cheaper. We share, and I'll come on to fire when Steve's had his two penneth about neighbourhood policing. We share premises with the fire service. I think we've put our occupational health in with your own. Here we have taken out a whole tier of middle management by merging 6 area commands into 3. We've rationalised the fleet. We have got very, very low overtime, and so we've done everything we can, really, in a nutshell, except cut the neighbourhood police. And we hope, particularly with the new precept, that we will be able, I think Steve's estimate is that that will hold on to about 100 officers for us. I hope that we can keep neighbourhood policing safe all the same. Do you agree?
Absolutely. Just very briefly, I'd say that for me, neighbourhood policing is it's the foundation upon which we operate, and without it, that connection with communities and the whole concept of policing with the consent of communities would be eroded, and that's not going to happen while I'm Chief Constable. So you can have an assurance that we will look to protect as much of the current model of neighbourhood policing as we possibly can, and please don't read into that I'm trying to chip away at it. We've only got a budget for the next 12 months upon which we can base our operating model, my operating model, that the Commissioner approves financially. That itself is not a great position to be in, but suffice to say that my intentions are to try and enhance and make better what we've got in neighbourhood policing, because I absolutely agree with everything that you said. It's vital. It's absolutely vital if we're going to continue to have the public's confidence and trust.
So far as my approach to the government's position, it's gone past consultation stage now. They've announced that they're going to legislate. I think that they are going fundamentally wrongly about trying to get 2 excellent, very valued, but quite different public services to work more closely together. What they are, I thought they were localists, but what they are trying to do is to drive a change in governance first, when what they need to do is encourage from the bottom up closer collaborative working in a number of ways. And we already do quite a lot. As I've said, we've got some police in fire stations. There are some villages in Northumberland now that wouldn't have either a police presence or a fire one if we hadn't merged together, sold off one set of premises and lodged both types in another one. We have in this city Safety Works, which is a great joint project. We got some funding for that from the Home Office to up it. It was about, lots of you will know about it, but it was run by the fire service. It was about safety. It was about look left, look right, left again. Is that the right way around? Right, left, right again. Before you cross the road, it was about if your friends get very drunk in the park, don't leave them behind. It was a resource for practical citizenship, if you like, for young people and for schools here. We've got funding now, and it's changing its nature. All of that will remain, but we work very closely with the fire service, and it will now be teaching stuff about child sexual exploitation, stuff about good relationships, stuff about consent in sexual relationships. It will be about armouring young children against being groomed on the internet. All of that is a joint project, jointly staffed, and there's more we can do. So it isn't about governance. What it's about, and I think the way forward for us, is that we can set up a collaborative board. The Fire Authority and I already meet regularly, and I meet with the fire chiefs, and we can set up a collaborative group. And let's not forget that in my territory too, there is Northumberland Fire Service, which is a part of the county council, run by a portfolio holder in the county council and integrated in there. So any kind of single governance in the hands of a PCC would be very difficult to attain, and also it would be fairly pointless because there clearly aren't savings on overheads when the fire service is already integrated profoundly into the county council. So what we will do is we will set up a collaborative board of all of those agencies, and we will work very positively towards economising whilst optimising the service, working very much more closely together. After all, the fire service now are in the communities. It's not Trumpton Town anymore, where you slide down a pole when the bell goes. They are out in the communities doing things like smoke detector work, fire prevention, giving people deep fat fryers instead of chip pans, and they are in a pole position to look after the communities in a way that the police do. albeit in a very different dimension. So I think there are lots of ways in which we could work together, but down from the top, change of governance is absolutely not the way to go about it.
Councillor Faulkner.
Thank you for your comments tonight, your responses so far. Can I try and connect the work that you both do with two other items that are on the agenda tonight? One is a report on the Gambling Act, and the second is a motion which refers to the Licensing Act. And I think of these as two major pieces of legislation which have had difficult, and one hopes unintended, but certainly difficult consequences playing out in their implementation. I wonder what your priorities might be in relation to those two areas in protecting communities and vulnerable people, alcoholism and gambling.
I must say, it's about 10 years, isn't it, more or less now, since the licensing legislation changed, and it did have consequences which were not, I think, predicted. However, I don't think that's the root of the work that we have to do about alcoholism and its impact on community, lack of safety and its impact upon crime. I would very much welcome change to the legislation which introduced different tests from the dominance of the market test, so that protecting communities that are already well exposed, if not overexposed, to licensed outlets became a criteria sensibly expressed and regularly used. And that would, I hope, stop just random proliferation. But there are lots of very good schemes that have started to try and limit the impact of alcohol. We work very closely with Balance, which is the regional alcohol prevention agency. I'm on the Police and Crime Commissioners Association's group for trying to limit the harm from alcohol. You may have seen a letter in the press from us recently suggesting that the breathalyzer limit should be cut. It must be quite odd for people who live in Berwick-upon-Tweed not to know. You know, it's 50 milligrams in Scotland and 80 milligrams here. It must be quite confusing for them. So it gives us a kind of extra point to make. But clearly, the evidence from Scotland is that many lives have been saved since they cut that back. And there is some very good work going on, police linked, about alcohol. We've had for some time, and we wish we could boost an alcohol behaviour course. So what we don't want to do is when people are found in trouble because of having drunk too much, we don't want to just give them a penalty notice for disorder. We would rather persuade them to pay half of the costs they'll have to pay for that and go on an alcohol behaviour course, which will help them to moderate and deal with their alcohol, in the hope that that positive contribution can go forward. It's not been a runaway success, that. It's strange, because you think about the equivalent, which is about speeding awareness courses. They're a runaway success. Everyone goes on those, but I guess it's a slightly different psychological approach here. But we're trying all sorts of positive ways to try to reduce alcohol dependence and to try to reduce its impact on crime. And I think legislation is only one of those ways. Steve, do you want to add anything?
Well, only in as much that you mentioned gambling and licensing. I think that in policing terms, we would always have a view about the impact that both of those issues, both of those behaviours, if you like, can impact upon policing. The relaxation of licensing laws, in my personal opinion, I think I was working in a different force at the time, and I was asked then, and my view hasn't really changed. I think it would take a generation for it to change the attitudes towards the consumption of alcohol. And I did struggle at the time, and I still struggle with the concept that we could change them overnight and expect that the culture of our communities to change dramatically. I think the relationship between communities in this country and alcohol is very different to that of other countries. It's similar to some in Europe, similar to, say, Germany and Holland, Czech Republic, and tend to be more of towards the east, the north and the east of Europe. I think there's some similarities there, but very, very different to the Mediterranean culture, and that's the same in many aspects of our life. So, but I think more importantly, particularly when you bring in gambling into the same debate, there is something about at what point does the role of the police start to bite, and where do we come into it? And I think there's something about the correct solution for all of this is to make it socially unacceptable. It has to be, that's the best enforcement tool that there is, far more effective than the law, which in itself can be quite a blunt tool. It has to be socially unacceptable for people to spend a huge proportion of their income, be that earned income or be it from benefits, on gambling. It has to be. It has to become social. If you're going to try and stop it, any amount of law and regulation will not work. It'll only take you so far, and it's there at the extremes. It has to be socially unacceptable. What is the role of the police in doing that? Well, that's a really interesting point. And how effective will the police be in performing that role at its lowest level with reduced resources? Going to be difficult. And the same to be said for alcohol. And the best analogy I can draw is that of drinking and driving. In the early 1970s, as many of you will know, drinking and driving was acceptable. Dare I say that? I think it was. I think it was acceptable behaviour. It certainly wasn't ostracised in the same way that it is now. Why did that change? I think there was a huge emphasis on public education through public information campaigns that were on television and radio. There was a very, very high likelihood that you would get caught, so there's some hard targeted enforcement by the police. And there were very, very heavy penalties imposed by the courts. Now, you put three of those together, and over the course of a generation, it became socially unacceptable to drink and drive. I think you've got to take the same approach for those two. But how effective will the police be in dealing with that? It's going to be difficult as we move forward.
Councillor Todd.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I was very heartened by the Commissioner's strong statements about legal highs or determination between the two of you to get to grips with that problem insofar as the law allows at the moment. One reason why I was heartened by it was I live 2 streets away from the Best One shop in Arthur's Hill, and can testify both by just experience of living in that area and talking to other people I represent there, as well as by working closely with the neighbourhood police team, which I think is quite ably led by the Sergeant Jason Kell and his colleagues, who I know have tried hard over about 2 years or more to try and persuade the shop owners to see sense, and they've been promised all sorts of things by people connected with the shop, and it's never been carried through in the end. So the recent action of closing down the shop, I think, was absolutely justified, and thank you very much on behalf of most people in that area for taking that action, particularly because of the adverse effect it was having on the health of young people who were using the shop. The shop is now closed, and it prompts my question, really, as to whether in trying to get to grips with rogue shops like that, do you ever make approaches to other franchises that might be connected with them? I mean, in their case, they're obviously part of the Best One franchise, which I think is just a kind of publicity, uniform branding. But in retailing, of course, the strength of any brand depends on its weakest link. And you would think really the people who run the Best Value brand would be concerned where they've got a weak link like the one in Beaconsfield Street. And one sanction that might be available if brand agencies like Best One were interested in it might be just to terminate the branding, make it clear publicly why they're doing that. The other franchise that's active there is the post office counters. I was amazed when post office counters moved the Arthur's Hill post office into that location, but there it was. And now, of course, there's no post office counter available to people for at least the next few months in Arthur's Hill. I don't know whether you've had any discussions with the post office nationally. It seems amazing to me that the post office would put one of its counters in a place that sold stuff that was clearly harmful to people. It's difficult getting answers out from sometimes, but I just wondered whether approaching the problem through franchises, where that arises, might be an option to be considered. Perhaps you're doing it already. Thank you very much.
I'll just say what I know, and then you can come in. No, I think you make a really good point, Councillor Todd, if I may say so. I would have thought the post office counter needs to move and to stay somewhere else. I think that things are happening about looking at other aspects of the work of that outlet and other ways of tackling what was going on there or tackling what might go on there in the future. If I could just take the time to make 2 quick comments about legal highs. Well, 3 maybe. One is, the shocking nature of this marketing at it's young males, the research found, between about 16 and 25, who are the target market, and it's essentially taken up by young males who've come out of care. Very vulnerable community indeed. Secondly, much danger has been caused, obviously not deliberately, by the way the government tried to tackle legal highs in the first place, which was by outlawing particular kinds of compound, because the manufacturers were able to change the compound into something similar, which wasn't then unlawful. The consequence was that if you bought Clockwork Orange on day 1, it was okay, you took it and you weren't hurt by it, but then it will have changed if that's been made unlawful on day 2. And when you buy it on day 3, it could be fundamentally different, 10 times stronger and very, very dangerous. So those things together just make you realise what an absolute evil these things are, and how much we must use every piece of tackle we have available to stamp them out. And I mean, 10 out of 10 to Northumbria police, they're not even unlawful yet, and still they've managed to bring about these closures using a number of different vehicles. So I'm sure they're open to more suggestions.
I mean, the issue around the specific issue around the post office, there are some developments around that. It's probably best that I'll leave it at that. But I agree wholeheartedly with everything that you said. I think interesting when we spoke about neighbourhood policing, one of the principles of neighbourhood policing is putting people in place, local officers and local team leaders, sergeants, who understand problem solving. And sometimes, as I said before, the blunt enforcement of existing legislation is not the best way to tackle a problem, and there are many other ways to do it, not least of which by working in partnership with the City Council. So, we've had huge support with the protection, the prevention warnings and notices that we've been through with the local authority here in Newcastle. So I agree with everything that you said. It's a problem, and we have to tackle it in an innovative and creative way, and that's exactly what we're doing so far. I think we'll get better at it. I think we'll get slicker. And we'll speed up the process of getting to that end point where local communities are not having to raise the concerns that they have done over the very premises that you're speaking of.
Members, we have exceeded the time laid to one side for this item, but because of the interest, could we ask for the last question from Councillor Kemp, please? And apologies to anyone else who was hoping to speak.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Thank you both very much for attending tonight. Seeing you very regular at the moment, Vera. Could you please possibly give me a little bit of information regarding how funds recovered from the proceeds of crime are going to be benefiting the North East?
We have a regional serious and organised crime unit that is a very fine example of a true collaboration. Ourselves, Durham and Cleveland Police put significant resources into that, and it's also aided by some central government funding. And from that, we are getting better and better at using proceeds of crime to recycle that money into tackling offenders, particularly at a higher level. I can get some statistics for you in terms of the amount of money that we've managed to get in and the amount of money that we've recycled and what we've done with it. There's no issue with that. I can get that. I don't have those figures off the top of my head, Councillor, unfortunately. But suffice to say that we're very proud of what we've got as a three-force collaboration. It's a true collaboration. It's not just some people who turn up and work together now and then. This is a multi-million-pound investment across the three forces, and obviously we're the largest contributor to that. But it's paying dividends, and you'll see a lot of examples of that when people are talking about Operation Bombay and how we tackle those people who prey upon the elderly as bogus offenders, and it's renowned nationally as being the best example of its kind. So there's a lot of good work undertaken at a regional level, and that's the principal way that we recycle proceeds of crime.
So I can be a lot more political than Steve, and it is time the law was changed about the proceeds of crime. I was on the backbench bill committee when the current proceeds of crime legislation went through, and it's fine, but it hasn't kept up with technology. For instance, if you preload a credit card, that can't be seized because that wasn't available when we passed the 2002 Act. So there are a number of ways in which criminals can skillfully disguise their proceeds that are unreachable. And the other thing about it is that NERSU is great, which is the organisation across the three of us that really works extremely well on serious and organised crime. But when it seizes, or when any of the police seize the proceeds of crime, they get only half of it. And I see no reason why we shouldn't get the other half as well. But the other half, unfortunately, goes down to the Chancellor of the Exchequer. And it seems to me that those two changes in the law would make a great difference to funding policing here.
Thank you. Could we thank the Chief Constable and the Crime Commissioner for their well-rounded response to your questions. Public question time. We have received no questions from the public. Item 7, reports referred from Cabinet. A, the gambling policy. I will call on Councillor Kemp to move the report, seconded by Councillor Powers.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. The Licensing Authority is required to prepare and publish a statement of principles every 3 years, which it proposes to apply when exercising its functions under the Gambling Act 2005. The report proposes a revised gambling policy for the next 3 years, which will be the basis upon which applications made under the Gambling Act will be determined by the City Council as Licensing Authority. The licensing objectives are set out in Part A, page 26 of the report. In order to assess and monitor the social impact of gambling, the Licensing Authority has developed working relationships with the gambling industry, Northumbria Police and charitable support organisations through the formulation of a working group. Members of the working group include GamCare, NECA and the Samaritans. The group meets quarterly to assess the effect of legislation on those who gamble. The Council's officers also work with the Gambling Commission when required and have carried out joint inspections and exercises. The officers regularly liaise with officers from the Gambling Commission. During the last 3 years, there have been no significant issues of non-compliance. Since the implementation of the gambling policy in 2013, there have been no contested applications and the number of gambling premises have decreased in number. In 2013, there were 82 gambling premises licensed within Newcastle, and this figure has now fallen to 77 licensed gambling premises. All costs of providing a service in respect to gambling are recovered from fees set by the Council and paid by applicants and operators. The most significant proposed amendments to the 2016-19 gambling policy are inclusion of sections relating to local risk assessments and a local area profile. From the 6th of April 2016, the Gambling Commission's licence conditions and code of practice require gambling premises operators to undertake a risk assessment taking into consideration their local information. Licence holders must assess the local risk to the licensing objectives posed by the provision of gambling facilities at each of their premises. Operators will be expected to have policies, procedures and control measures in place to mitigate those risks. Completion of a local area profile will help inform specific risks that operators will need to address in their risk assessment. A local area profile should ensure applicants identify relevant safeguarding measures that are bespoke to the particular area. The operators will then be required to have sufficient controls in place to mitigate associated risks and adhere to the licensing objectives. The purpose of the policy is for the protection and health and well-being of our citizens and indeed our most vulnerable citizens. I'd like to thank the efforts of the officers in producing this review, which I recommend to Council.
Seconder, please, Councillor Steve Powers.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. There isn't much else to add to Councillor Kemp's excellent introduction here of the policy that's before full Council today. I'd just quickly like to add again my thanks to officers who've worked on revamping the policy and to to partners and businesses that have contributed to the consultation on the policy. I think it's a really important document for here in the city, and it's a really important document for officers to be able to continue their excellent work at being able to protect our citizens from some of the negatives that can come from gambling here in Newcastle. So I'll second the report, Lord Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Stone.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I welcome the report. I was wanting to ask one question on it. We hear a lot on increasing amount in the media and in the city about the risks associated with fixed odds betting terminals, and I didn't see any particular direct reference to it in there. I understand that it comes within the category A of the schedule, but I was wondering if the council and the members concerned might want to say something about what the council's approach is to the spread, controlling the spread of fixed odds betting terminals, particularly here in Newcastle.
Do you wish to take the individual questions or leave it there? Right. Fire away.
I really welcome this report, and I just wanted to make the link with the alcohol licensing work that is undergoing. I was just really interested to know from Councillor Kemp the role of the Samaritans, because what is obvious in the licensing committee hearings, how often people are vulnerable for not only alcohol abuse or harm, but also vulnerable to such things as gambling. So I really welcome the support and the report, and having had to sort of be part of making a decision about it, I would like to make that link. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Lower.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I would also like to welcome this update that we've had to the Gambling Act, gambling policy. I think there is a couple of things I would just like to mention, though. I do hope that we are going to keep abreast of some of the issues, especially around the FOBT betting terminals and the amount of them in premises and the problems they can cause. The thing that we don't address, and the thing that everybody doesn't address, and the biggest issue we probably have with gambling, is internet gambling. But I have to say that as a member of the LGA, we've actually had a meeting with the industry, and it's been brought about by the tougher stance that councils are taking on licensing of gambling premises. I do hope that we do keep an eye on that, and if there is any changed legislation, we try to implement it as soon as possible, because I think these are the two main risks to people in this city. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Councillor Faulkner.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I deliberately mentioned this to the Crime Commissioner because I do think it's an area that maybe we don't discuss enough as members, and it is a worry in my part of the city as it is in others. And I've seen all sorts of statistics that say there's still a very high incidence of underage betting despite the codes of practice that the industry have signed up to. So it's the proliferation of betting shops in poorer parts of the city, it's the casino-type machines that have been implemented. It's still rather poor policing of betting by the industry. And I'm pleased to see that this idea of a local area profile is coming to the fore through this new regulation and the new risk assessments. I just wonder what opportunity there is for individual members to actually contribute to those risk assessments and the profiling really of particular areas, because I'd certainly be interested in contributing, as I'm sure other members would.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Higgins.
Sure, well, the great minds think alike, Lord Mayor, but Councillor Faulkner has just asked the very question I was going to ask about the participation of local members.
Thank you. Any more contributors? Councillor Kemp, you have a right to reply.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Councillor Stone, can I get back here with a full, detailed response, please, having consultation with the officers? I don't claim to be an expert in gambling. My track record with any gambling I've ever made would show I'm an abject failure. So. Anne, you made a comment and gratitude about the Samaritans. I too echo that view, and also of all the other organisations involved in the consultation, the voluntary groups, bringing their wealth of expertise to the table. Anita, Councillor Lower, you raised the work about the LGA, and I note your generous offer at Cabinet to bring that work into the City Council and make sure it's fed into the work that we're doing, so thank you for that. Councillor Faulkner and Councillor Higgins, how can I possibly refute the incredible duo? And I would suggest that yes, as is always the case, local members' knowledge is significant, and there are clearly opportunities to bring your own wealth of knowledge about the locality into the area profiles. So thank you for that.
Does Council agree to receive the report? Thank you. Next item of business, Code of Conduct for Members, Bullying and Harassment. I will call on Councillor David Wood to move the report, seconded by Councillor Cook.
Okay, thank you very much, Lord Mayor. This report is on the supplemental and it's come about as a result of discussions with Standards Committee, and I'd just like to move the report, Lord Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Cook.
Formally second the report, it speaks for itself.
No other responses? Could I ask if the Council are prepared to accept this report? Agreed. Thank you. Questions by members? We have received 2 questions marked for written reply. These, together with the responses, have been circulated and have also been displayed in the foyer. Item 10, Cabinet Members Update, Communities and Facilities. I will now call on Councillor Stockdale to introduce the report. When he comes in.
Thank you very much.
Oh, he's there.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Colleagues, I'm sure you've all read my Cabinet report, so I'll try and keep my opening comments brief. Can I first of all thank the officers within my portfolio area for their support in putting this report together, and of course the work that sits behind it. As the report says, this is my first Cabinet report, and I've enjoyed the process, if that's the right word to use. I very much valued the time that I spent with the Scrutiny Committee a couple of weeks ago, and I've taken on board many of the comments that members of Scrutiny made about the report and the structure of it, and the views from colleagues around the table, some of which I think have been picked up in the addendum to this report. But I intend to do a more detailed response to scrutiny soon. I'm sorry I'm out of breath. I've just run back from the facilities. Excuse me, let me catch my breath. I'm really unfit. That's my first pledge for the new year. So colleagues, on the theme of working with other councillors and in what I hope is the spirit of solidarity, in recent weeks I've held 2 of what I hope will become regular get-togethers with councillors about the cooperative communities team. I recognise that councillors have direct involvement with many of the areas within my portfolio, and so I hope at our future meetings we can broaden out discussions to look at things like libraries and leisure and culture. I genuinely value and respect the input that you all have, and I recognise that you have a vital role to play in delivering on our cooperative communities agenda. Interestingly, following the last meeting that I had earlier this week, I met with Newcastle University, with Open Lab at Newcastle University. If you haven't met with them, I suggest you do, because they're really inspirational. And they were sharing with me some of the tools that they're developing to enable the communities that we represent better link in with, better engage and link in with their councillors and with their local councils. And I'm hoping that at one of the early meetings that we have together as councillors, I can bring them along to talk to you about some of the work that they're doing for us in Newcastle. Before I open the debate to your questions, picking up on the point that Councillor Stone made at the beginning of the evening, let me just speak briefly, if I may, about Elsick Pool, by way of a short update for members. Can I say, first of all, that the local ward councillors for Elsick, Dipu, Habib and my friend Councillor Anne Schofield here, have been working tirelessly and without credit with the local community organisations and stakeholders like North Benwell Youth Project and others to work on developing a plan to give Elsick Pool a long-term future. They've also been working with my colleague Councillor Bell on the kind of wider impact and the wider regeneration of Elsick and how the pool will fit within that. We've been meeting quite regularly. We had our last meeting, I think it was last week or maybe the week before last. And I'm still really encouraged and positive that with the work that's being done and the work that we're doing together, that there will be a long-term solution and future for Elswick Pool, and led by the local ward councillors and hopefully supported by myself and officers within my portfolio, will continue to meet regularly, will continue the engagement with the local community, and we'll be working towards a plan to that end. So colleagues and comrades, we know that we're facing tough times. We debated that in length at our last meeting. We are contending, as we know, with cuts that are so extreme it can be sometimes quite difficult to remain positive. I hope if you get anything from my report, you get a sense of the kind of thread of optimism that runs through it. I think that this council does and still can do a lot of really good things for residents and visitors of our city. And I certainly know that the Labour administration, with what I genuinely hope is the support of our opposition members, are not simply here to manage decline. So colleagues, I'll leave it at that and I'll open it up to your comments and questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Ashby.
Thank you, Lord Mayor, and may I thank Councillor Stockdale for his report. And I want to focus in on the passages on libraries on pages 70 and 75 and implications in the light of future plans. His report gives some detail of successes within the library service, on which they have to be congratulated. But would he agree with me that if the proposed cuts in opening hours go through, there will be neither the quantity nor the quality of such successes next year? Would he confirm that, for instance, the reduction in hours from 60 to 23 in Gosforth would mean that the Thursday work club for unemployed people with all its benefits would no longer be possible? Does he appreciate that at present school children use the library every school day to do their homework and to have a place of safety after school, but this will not be available if the library isn't open on a Tuesday or a Thursday? Can he confirm that the draconian reductions proposed will have no effect on the repayment of capital costs associated with this new facility, and that total revenue savings are likely to be less than the employment costs of 2 full-time employees? Will he accept that the greatly reduced time for access to the computers within the building would significantly reduce digital inclusion in the immediate vicinity of the library without saving any money at all? And does he understand that taking credit for improved access for disabled at the Newburn Library while halving the opening hours will be seen as incomprehensible by many of its users of whatever level of ability?
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Stone.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I put in a written question to Councillor Stockdale, which has not been included in the public papers, but I think it'd be useful just to ask the point again. I understand it's the Council's policy to pursue the opportunity for a trust for our parks and green spaces, and I understand that there has been briefings given to Cabinet on that particular progress on that. When does the Cabinet member expect to be able to brief the rest of Council about this issue? Because I'm sure that all of us in our wards have got views and important points to raise about parks and green spaces in our areas, and we could potentially have useful input into the deliberations on that. So just a plea for us to be included and briefed at some point in the near future.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Todd.
My question is also about libraries, but if I just very briefly preface it with something that I don't think appears in the report. But I hope somebody has sent our appreciation to library staff at the City Library for hosting a visit by Malala Yousafzai. And she chose to use the library as a way of making a statement about the importance of libraries and education for children in Syria and elsewhere. And I think it was perhaps a tribute to the City Library that venue was chosen. My question is, I think Councillor Stockdale initiated a public consultation over opening hours for libraries, and I was wondering if you could say a bit about the responses to that consultation. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Kane.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I'm going to be nice to you, David. Thanks for mentioning the City Stadium allotments. I was going to pay tribute to my colleague Stephen Slidis, as he's not here, as he very cleverly negotiated a construction company working on the stadium to design their compound so we could recycle it into the allotments. It was quite a clever little story, and if Stephen was here I wouldn't compliment him, but he's not, so I will compliment him. On page 73, I welcome the system that we now have a system for community groups to use Envirocall for free if they do litter picks. That's something I've been banging on about here for I think a couple of years, so I'm very pleased to see that happen. And lastly, a question about the review of the Cooperative Community Service and Ward Governance. Is that the review that's taking place as part of the budget debate, or is that a wider review? And a contribution. In Ousburn Ward, we've been using our ward grant, a lot of it the last couple of years, to fund people to help community groups apply for their own funding, which has been remarkably successful. I was a little bit cynical about it at first, when it was first proposed, but it was the brainchild of our community coordinator, Kevin Coombs, and I want to pay tribute to him here, because that was a great idea as it turned out, and I think the rest of the city, other wards, could do that if they're not already. Thank you, Lord.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Higgins.
Can I also thank Councillor Stockdale for his very comprehensive first report? And I think what it does show is all the positive things that are happening now and all the positive things that we're trying to do, and our thanks to our officers to retain these important services at these very difficult times. And just a couple of questions I wanted to ask from the report. I have been along to a couple of the consultation events around our libraries, which I think are so dear to so many people, and I'll be interested to hear a response to Councillor Todd's question. But one thing that did come up, and I'm just looking at page 69, where you talk about partnership with other sectors of the community. You mentioned universities, colleges, and also cultural organisations. Somebody suggested possible private business sponsorship of our libraries, that they could almost be like a business adopting a library and sponsoring it in some way and not privatising, but that was one of the suggestions that did come up, but I'll be interested to hear some feedback on the libraries. As a keen cyclist, and I'm sure that Councillor Talbot shares my views on this, I'm delighted to see the initiatives around cycling. I must admit I hadn't been aware of the Ride Newcastle event for 2016, and I'll be keen to hear some more details about that, particularly as we're trying to promote cycling in Scotswood now through the Scotswood Cycle Hub that we're trying to set up. And I'll just be interested to know whether the Cabinet member on his gleaming new cycle will be at the front of that ride, leading us on our way. I'll look forward to that. And the final, just the final comment I wanted to make is on page 73, just a name check really, a mention of Claire Hodgson, who I still refer to as our ward coordinator. I'm not sure what Claire's title is now, who does a great job for us, and that she won the Our Place Award from the Department of Communities and Local Government on 19th of March in London. So it's a tremendous achievement by Claire. I just want to mention that.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Just a couple of brief questions on the addendum. Page 5, you mentioned the Newcastle Cultural Fund, and as I remember, this was set up with the idea that we would encourage others to join in funding the arts, and we've been looking for extra sponsors. So I just wondered how successful that had been, and whether any of the 1.45 million that you mentioned and grants was provided from funds outside the council. And the second one was on page 6, where you've talked about the City Library, and you say this will include considering ways to make better use of underused space in the City Library. I just wondered what underused space there was and what sort of organisations you were approaching to consider using that.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Ireland.
In section 2.8 of your report, I note that customer service centre staff and contact centre staff have handled many phone calls. However, one that they were unable to respond to this morning was from a Parklands resident who has severe hearing difficulties. She rang the Civic Centre but was unable to make out the options open to her and so hung up. Fortunately, she was later helped to make the call by a neighbour, but she contacted me as she was concerned about the situation. As there must be other residents in the city who have hearing difficulties, what is the Cabinet member doing to make sure that all of our residents, especially those with difficulties, and for one reason or another, no access to a computer, a situation that will surely become worse with reduced hours in our library, doing to address this problem? Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Talbot.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. This is a very positive report in terms of activities that we're providing for residents in the city. Rob's kind of talked a bit about what I was going to talk about, but I really wanted to draw attention to the work that active Newcastle staff have done around This Girl Can project. and the breeze rides, which I don't know if members are aware, which is at 2.2 in the leisure section. Breeze rides are women-only rides led by women. And Newcastle has been acknowledged nationally as the most successful city, having on average double the number of participants than other cities, which I think is absolutely fantastic, encouraging women to ride. And one of the reasons I wanted to raise this is because I actually lead breeze rides. And it's been a real privilege to meet a number of women across the city, many of whom are literally and metaphorically starting on this journey for the first time. Many of them had never learned to cycle when they were little, but are actually learning through the city's opportunities that we give them, and are actually going on 20 or 30-mile bike rides, which is fantastic for their health and issues about air quality. So I think it's really good. The question I want to ask is, will that continue into 2016? And there's a comment about, again, Councillor Higgins mentioned it, Create the Ride Newcastle for 2016, which I assume is the kind of replacement for the Sky Ride. I just wondered how far those plans had progressed, and again, whether or not we might be able to be involved in discussions around those.
Thank you, Councillor. Just to prove we're not ignoring you, Councillor Schofield.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. My badge is the right way up. I would like to thank Councillor Stockdale for this report. I think it was a very hard report to have to write at this time when it's so important to engage with our communities under huge stress. I was also very pleased to see the recognition he gave in the report to the awards given to Sue Wannop and Claire Hodgson, officers of the Council. They and other colleagues within these teams have the willingness to go the extra mile to make a difference to people's lives, but their work is generally invisible and unsung. So I'm really pleased that he made a big point about that. Last night, with several members from across the Council, I attended a very moving event at the Million Centre. It brought together a wide range of people, interests and concerns as part of the Newcastle Holocaust Memorial Programme, and it challenged us very seriously to confront the past and face the future for the Roma, Sinti and Gypsy communities that were stripped of their human rights and lives by the Nazis, and who many still face appalling discrimination and persecution. Apart from the appalling nature of what we learned, it showed very clearly the importance of local projects and partnerships committed to working together to improve the lives of oppressed communities within our city. We had a very serious discussion, much of it very upsetting, but we also had some wonderful, joyful singing from the girls of the Benwall Youth Club, and we had food provided by the Women's Enterprise Group at the Million Centre, which hosted the evening. My question is, would it be possible for us to build on the work of these projects, even though it's in really difficult times, to build the partnerships, citywide partnerships, and establish a citywide policy that builds on all this excellent work to support local projects who are working with people who've been persecuted, but in ways that will lead to social cohesion rather than intolerance and conflict that many people are facing. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. And finally, Councillor Huddard.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I just wanted to mention one item which is actually on page 73, and it refers to the Oasis Cafe. It isn't a question, Lord. Well, it might be a question.
Well, it should be a question,
to ask if the Cabinet member is aware of some of the activities run by the people in the Oasis Cafe. It actually acts as a day centre for a lot of homeless people, people with mental health problems, people who've been in prison, people who've fallen on hard times. And it does a sterling job. For the past couple of years, I've been involved in raising several £1,000s for them to provide Christmas dinners for people who haven't got anybody and wouldn't have got a Christmas dinner or anything like that. And even the workmen who were working on Riverside Dean were so impressed, they came forward and offered money to buy clothes and warm gloves and things like that for the folks attending it. I actually advised them to apply to Elsick and Westgate and Benwell wards for some funding, and they managed all right last Christmas, but I think they will be doing it this year. to provide Christmas dinners for people who wouldn't get anything otherwise. And it's all done under the auspices of mental health matters. So I just thought I'd chip that in. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Stockdale, you have a right to reply.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Thank you, colleagues, for your contribution. That was very interesting. Councillor Ashby obviously didn't get my memo about the spirit of solidarity, but I'll say this. I mean, of course, I appreciate the impact that the proposals around revised opening hours to our libraries are going to have on organisations and community groups and service users of libraries. It's a shame, it would appear, that you don't really appreciate the impact that the £109 million your government cut from our budget has had on the library service, which is why we're in this position in the first place. But anyway, never mind. Councillor Stone, your question about the work that we're doing on trusts for parks and green spaces. In direct answer to your question is I'll bring something to Council when I have an update. Obviously, at this stage, it's work in progress, but my intention with that, picking up on my point at the beginning of the report, was to have cooperative discussions with colleagues at the various meetings that I intend to hold with councillors across both groups within my portfolio area over the course of the year. Councillor Todd, and I'll pick up part of Councillor Higgins' question as well in terms of the consultation on the opening hours of libraries. Members will be aware that I think I've sent out a couple of emails to elected members asking for your feedback on the proposed opening hours. The idea of a consultation is just that we put across a set of base proposals that are based on the data that we have, and the hope being that people will feed into those proposals. We can then revise them and come back with proposals that, where possible, mitigates against some of the things that are raised during the consultation process. Of course, it's very difficult with the situation that we're in financially, but this is a genuine consultation, and the feedback that we've had, I was, like Councillor Higgins, I've been to a couple of consultation sessions as well. The feedback that we've had has been very reasonable, very understanding of the financial situation that we're in. And I hope that when all of that is fed in and the various contributions that we've had from elected members across the city is fed into the process, we will be able to come back with something that takes into account what's been said in the consultation. Councillor Kane, the cooperative communities review, and answer your question on that, I guess I'd look at it in two parts. The first part is, yes, it is indeed part of the budget consultation process, because there is some budget implications with board committee budgets and changes to the way the cooperative communities team is staffed in terms of numbers. But actually there's also a wider process that again, picking up on the point I've made about involving elected members from across the city, there's a wider process in terms of making the proposal, the baseline proposals that we put together actually work. We had a really, what I hope was a very interesting and fruitful discussion with elected members from both parties, and indeed colleagues, independent colleagues, not independent party, sorry, over the last couple of weeks, where we've been talking about the proposals that have been put forward. Some really interesting ideas and discussion points have come out of that. That was, in my view anyway, a genuine attempt to kind of reach out and say, I recognise that the cooperative communities team directly impacts each of us in our role as ward councillors, and I think you've all got a really important role to play in kind of shaping that moving forward. Councillor Higgins, I do have a bike, so I'm sure I'll be participating in the bike ride, but I'm almost certain I won't be at the front. On your point about partnerships with business, actually quite interestingly, that's a piece of work that officers and I are kind of looking at actively at the moment to see whether or not that's something that we can do in terms of looking at whether we can get support from businesses specifically around libraries or specific activities within libraries. And again, when I have something to update you all on, I will. Councillor Taylor, the direct answer to your question on the Newcastle Culture Investment Fund is at this stage it hasn't attracted any additional investment yet. There was a phased process in terms of how that fund intended to work, and last week I think it was, Councillor Dunn might correct me, but last week Councillor Dunn and I were at a meeting with the Community Foundation, who obviously are administering the fund. We, as well as awarding the latest round of grant funding of some fantastic organisations that were funded from the Newcastle Culture Investment Fund last week, we also had a discussion about the future of the fund and how we were going to start to try and attract some of that inward investment into the fund to kind of give it a boost. The question that you asked about the City Library, there is some empty space at the City Library. If you've been on the behind-the-scenes tour of the City Library, you'll know the space I'm talking about on the top floor, what essentially is the office accommodation. There's a lot of empty space on that floor now. So we are looking now, exploring options to see if there's anything that we can do with that. Obviously, the City Library was designed as a library, so it's not the most adaptable space, but I think we are exploring whether or not there are any options that where we could make some use out of the empty space that's available. And again, when and if something comes of that, I'll share it with members. Have I missed anything on there? I don't think so. Councillor Allen, your question about your resident who had difficulties when she called into the customer service centre today. There is a text phone service, as you probably know, for residents who are hard of hearing. I'm not sure if there was an issue, or she didn't know about that. If there was an issue, she didn't know about it. Right, okay. So maybe I could correspond with these separately and we can pick that specific point up. Councillor Talbot asked a question about cycling. My goodness, what a surprise. I think you make a fantastic point about this Girl Can, and indeed about the success of Skyride. And all credit to you. I know you were one of our glorious leaders, actually not glorious leaders, sorry, wrong context. You were one of our Skyride leaders, and you did some fantastic work there. And indeed, yes, the Ride Newcastle is an extension of the Skyride, and I'm happy. In fact, it came up at scrutiny, so in my update to scrutiny, I'm going to send you all some information on how that's coming together, and of course, I'll welcome the involvement of any member who kind of wants to be part of shaping that. Councillor Schofield, I'm really sorry I was unable to go at the event yesterday with the Roma communities. I had hoped to make it, but the perils of being a part-time politician, I had to work. Especially disappointing now that I've heard there was food and singing, but I think it would be good. I know we have regular meetings about Elswick Pool, so I think it would be quite good if you and I could get together and talk about your question specifically and see if that's something that we can build on. And then I'll tie that in. The final question from Councillor Hudder. I am familiar with the work of Oasis Cafe from my colleague Councillor Schofield, and I know they do fantastic work, and I know they're very dear to your heart, Anne, and I'm sure you continue to do good work with them. So thank you very much indeed, colleagues, for your contributions. I really do appreciate it. Thank you.
Does Council agree to receive this report? Appointments. There are no amendments to appointments this month. Item 12, Notice of Motion, Freedom of Information Act. I will call on Councillor Falconer to move the motion, seconded by Councillor Ashby.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Freedom of information, well, there's nothing wrong with legislation being reviewed. After 16 years, it's probably a very sensible thing to do. But doing it through a commission, most of whose members are actually known publicly to want to rein in the Act, doesn't seem to me to be right. And here I'd reference Jack Straw, who ironically is the man who took the Act through Parliament in the first place, and he's now on record as saying that inquiries about ministerial communications and the formulation of government policy shouldn't be allowed anymore. Then there's Michael Howard, and there's still something of the night about him. He's on it. And disappointingly, our own Alec Carlisle, Lord Carlisle, who has been a great champion of civil liberties and transparency, but not on this issue. So we've got Chris Grayling, who's the leader of the House, the former Injustice Secretary, a man of rare intellect, leading the charge against freedom of information. And what's his main case? Well, as far too many journalists are using it to generate stories. Well, perish the thought. Actually, the number of FOI requests from journalists are no more than they were 5 years ago, and the vast majority of FOI requests are still from private citizens. So this commission that's been set up to review the Act ahead of legislative changes, because they're bound to come, it's got nobody on it who's a known supporter of the Act, and it's got no remit at all to look more broadly at the operation of the Act and what has worked well. And yet just 3 years ago, the cross-party House of Commons Justice Committee, under Alan Beath's chairmanship, carried out a very exhaustive review of the Act, called lots and lots of witnesses, suggested some improvements, not curtailments, and called the Act, and I quote, a significant enhancement of our democracy. And frankly, that's how we view it. And there's no doubt that freedom of information has allowed for the revelation of many inconvenient truths, exposing child sexual exploitation and cover-ups, the inappropriate use of stop and search, and of course the scandal of MPs' expenses. There are two myths, you know. One is that it's an incredibly expensive burden for councils and others covered by it. Well, is it, in the context of the spend of these bodies? What about the way in which the revealing of the opening up of practices to greater disclosure and transparency actually saves money? You know, you don't need to go beyond MP's expenses again on that one. And truthfully, isn't it the price we pay for living in an open and transparent society? The second myth is that FOI removes these so-called safe spaces for policy discussion and policy development, and I don't believe there's any evidence to justify that. However, I do think there's still a culture of secrecy in our public decision-making processes, and that without effective freedom of information, it would be even worse. So the wish of government, and I think both sides would probably agree with this, to curtail freedom of information, it's really all part of the undermining of the media, you know, put it alongside the changes, the attacks on the BBC, for example, and part of this wider weakening of those likely to embarrass or oppose government, whether it's political parties or unions or charities, even the House of Lords. So it was good that former Minister Simon Hughes managed to get Network Rail under the law's remit, but there are many, many agencies which, in our view, should still be covered. So our view is that we should be strengthening, not weakening, freedom of information. Please support the motion.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Ashby.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I second the motion and once again find myself praising the achievement of a multiple election-winning Labour Prime Minister. To protect the supporters of the great leader here, I whisper his name, Tony Blair. Within an hour of his being tasked by the former member for Sedgefield to get a Freedom of Information Act onto the statute book, I spoke to and encouraged my friend and North East MP David Clark about the revolutionary job that he'd been given. Even in the first days of Blairism, I could see that this would be the jewel in the crown of the 97 government, and so it's proved to be. We cannot allow this addition to our hard-won freedoms to be eroded for reasons of administrative convenience or dogmatic Toryism or long-term whitewall oppositionism or spurious cost savings. And if I can quote that other stalwart Labour politician Tom Watson, the Labour Party believes the Act has given the public, campaigns and the media a powerful tool with which to hold the government to account. Without the Act, the death rates of individual cardiac surgeons would not have been published by the NHS, we would not have learned that the police used tasers on children, and the existence of cracks in the nuclear power station at Hinckley would have stayed hidden. Under the current rules, anyone can ask for information as long as finding it does not cost a government department more than £600 or another body £450. This is a tiny price to pay for this freedom. As my own leader has said recently, freedom of information is not just a nice journalistic tool. It's not just a way for members of Parliament to embarrass whoever is in government and whichever public authority they want to put on the spot. It's actually about making sure that the decisions that are made about the British people are accessible to the British people. Here, very much here, I say, freedom of information is for the many, not the few. I urge all councillors to support this motion in support of a law which is in the DNA of both Liberal Democrats and Labour.
I will now call on Councillor Powers to move an amendment, seconded by Councillor Cook.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I was a little bit surprised that we'd be discussing this motion last night. I thought we may have taken it to the vote last month to try and keep pace with the government's ridiculous speed in which they're trying to rush through this review, which I think is absolutely shocking, really. As Councillor Faulkner began to allude to, absolutely on this side of the chamber, we're absolutely committed to maintaining the Freedom of Information Act as is, and we would resist any attempts to try and water that down by this current government. In the spirit of trying to move through the agenda, because there's other motions on tonight, I'll keep it quite brief. But I just want to reiterate, the amendment to the motion is nothing more than a friendly amendment. It's basically giving ourselves a pat on the back on this side of the chamber for introducing this fantastic piece of legislation that really helps support the democratic process and ensure that public bodies and the government remain accountable. In addition, it mentions just a highlight of the number of freedom information requests that we dealt with in Newcastle City Council alone last year, which was just slightly over 1,300, a similar figure that we've seen for 3 or 4 years previously as well. So we're absolutely committed to making sure that the public have the right of access to information here in the city to be able to hold us to account. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cook.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. In seconding this amendment, I just want to actually read out some extracts of an article that appeared in the Daily Telegraph in 2011. And it read, "This incredible demand shows the power of transparency and why we need more of it. Information is power. It lets people hold the powerful to account, giving them the tools they need to take on politicians and bureaucrats. It gives people new choices and chances, allowing them to make informed judgments about the future. So we're making new commitments to transparency. For the first time, the raw data that will allow you to analyse the performance of public services will be made freely available. In the years to come, people will look back at the days when government kept all its data, that's your data, in vaults, and think how strange it was that the taxpayers, the people who actually own all this data, were locked out. Use this information, exploit it, hold your public services to account. They're there for you, so make them work for you." Lord Mayor, that article was written by a chap called David Cameron. I just wonder why he's changed his point of view.
Councillor Stone.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I'm pleased to have the opportunity to respond in this debate, particularly to Councillor Power's amendment, which purports to oppose attempts by the government to water down the FOI Act and introduce further restrictions to FOI provision. I was surprised by this because it is actually on record that Newcastle City Council has responded to the government's consultation with a suggestion that FOI requests should be geographically restricted, so the council should only be obliged to answer requests originating from within the authority's area. It's in writing. I can happily circulate the document if you want, Stephen. No, but I would make the point that the City Council, and he is the Cabinet Secretary of the Administration, the City Council has made a response to consultation which is in writing in a public document in parliamentary papers which suggests that the Council is in favour of restrictions to FOI. Now, this begs a question as to why the Cabinet Secretary, whether the Cabinet Secretary was aware of this when he tabled his amendment. The charitable explanation was that he was not, which suggests the Cabinet Secretary is not on top of his brief, but a less charitable suggestion is that he was aware but wanted to present a different picture to Council. Leaving all that aside, the Council's suggestion would mean in practice that any FOI requests from national organisations, whether the Friends of the Earth or the Taxpayers Alliance, would be invalid. FOI requests from the BBC or from national newspapers would also be invalid. Both of these have made FOI requests and published information the Council might have preferred to keep to itself, not least the Daily Mail story about Newcastle Council having the highest spend on social media of any local authority in the country. Now, I accept there's a cost and a burden on local authorities involved in meeting many FOI requests, and some perhaps have more merit than others. I accept the principle there ought to be a modest fee for requests which require excessive time and resources to respond to. But it's also important to remember this council is not always as transparent as it would like to make out. In particular, the council's budget information is somewhat opaque and could be much clearer than it is in terms of presentation of financial information. The Council's response to the consultation also makes a slightly odd suggestion that the Council favours refusing FOI requests by campaigners during consultation periods. This would mean, for example, the Council would not answer any FOI requests from, say, Newcastle Wildlife Campaign during LDF consultation, from Newcastle Cycling Campaign during consultation on traffic schemes, or from Newcastle CAB during consultation on the budget. In my view, this is not the hallmark of administration which welcomes difficult questions and scrutiny. Finally, Lord Mayor, it should be noted that the opposition group recently had to resort to submitting an FOI request ourselves in order to get the Council to disclose the citywide 2015 GCSE results by school. We made a number of requests to officers by conventional routes. These were not acted upon. That the Council should seek to withhold information on GCSE results from elected members is frankly troubling. It makes it very, very clear there is a continued need for open and transparent government and freedom of information policies locally and national. There is such a stark contrast between what Councillor Power's amendments claims and his own administration's response to the FOI consultation. It's so stark, in fact, that it leads me to wonder why the amendment was accepted as factual. I propose that we support the original motion and I encourage all members to do the same. Thank you.
Councillor Stone, could I ask you, if you look through your notes, did you mention Councillor Powers by name on that particular?
I'm happy to confirm I mentioned Councillor Powers by name, but I suggested that it wasn't his comments, but those of the administration, which he's a part.
Are you happy with that, Councillor Powers? Right, thank you. Councillor Faulkner.
Well, thank you, Lord Mayor. That's put the cat among the pigeons a bit, really, hasn't it? In fact, I was given sight of the Council's response, official response, just maybe a couple of hours before this meeting began. And I was a bit surprised as well. It contained statements that the volume of requests is a burden on local authorities, a tightening of the rules around requests should be implemented, FOI is often used by campaigners seeking additional information during periods of consultation, exemptions should be enhanced. And I thought, hang on, that doesn't tally with this amendment to the motion, but it's the reason why, if you vote against the original motion, I'll certainly support the amendment, because I will intend to point out to the Commission that there are two views from Newcastle City Council, the one that we, as politicians, are going to come to tonight, and the view that whoever wrote this submission, and I bet not many of your members there realise what's in this submission, has put forward. May I thank those who've contributed, and thank the seconder, Robin Ashby, other than to say that I do remember reading, and I did check it last night, that Tony Blair once referred to this act as the worst mistake that he made in office. But I think that says more about Tony Blair than it does about the legislation, maybe. And I do like there was a hint in what Councillor Stone said, that maybe it might be quite a good idea if we tried to sort of build a model for auditing transparency in local authorities and shone it on ourselves, because I think it might not be terribly happy about secret cabinet committees and working groups and the abolition of the LSP and replaced by private meetings of the chief executive with other public sector chiefs, no agendas, no minutes. I've raised this at audit committee. The refusal of Councillor Powers to publish any papers of the Newcastle Gateshead Partnership, delegated decisions to cabinet members instead of being taken in public gaze and subject to questioning before being taken, and so on. Well, yes, it was a relatively harmonious debate and a friendly amendment, but I'll just park a few of those thoughts for you to mull over before you vote.
Can we now go to the vote on the amendment? The amendment is carried. Has everyone voted? Amendment is carried 45 to 8. Do we need to vote on the motion? The amended motion, sorry. Item 13, notice of motion, public transport. I will call on Councillor Stone to move the motion, seconded by Councillor Huddard.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Lord Mayor, this opposition motion seeks to set out several areas of concern in respect of the current state of public transport in the city and within Tyne and Wear. We're pleased to see that by tabling this motion, we seem to have drawn a rapid response from the Leader of Council, and we welcome the fact that he seems to agree with our concerns. The first issue relates to metro performance. Performance has been below par for a long time now, although things have got worse since the combined authority took over responsibility from the ITA. We accept that the reinvigoration process has affected performance. The refurbishment of the metro cars had an impact on availability. The age of the unrefurbished units causes greater unreliability. There are engineering issues in South Tyneside. There are increasing passenger numbers and increased revenue, which we welcome, although some might suggest this is a byproduct of the ticket gates, which now give more accurate passenger counts. However, performance of the metro operator, DB Regio, is also causing concern. Poor performance is leading to penalty fines being imposed. The current punctuality figures are 67%, a full 20% behind their target level. Customers experiencing frequent disruption to service and feedback on social media is increasingly critical. There are concerns about rostering and staffing levels which contribute to problems, most notably on the day of the Great North Run. And there are real questions about whether DB Regio will still operate the service when the contractual breakpoint is reached in 2017, and there will be challenges ahead if the service returns in-house. Further down the track, pardon the pun, there are also significant issues arising in connection with the need for a long-term replacement for the current rolling stock. This will require major investment and government support, but there is not yet a clear way forward. Not all of these issues are directly within the control of Nexus and NICA, but given the single-party governance arrangements put in place, there is an expectation that NICA's lead member for transport takes direct accountability for addressing these concerns. Equally, there is an expectation the Combined Authorities Lead Officer for Transport, this Council's Chief Executive, and the Director of Transport Operations, the head of Nexus, are also accountable for performance. We call upon these persons to set out what they are doing to address the current difficulties and what steps they are taking to ensure the effective delivery of Metro post-2017 and to secure a long-term future for the system. And on these issues, it is notable, Lord Mayor, that Nexus is the subject of a corporate review to map out its future roles and responsibilities. And it's also notable that Nexus's strategic risk register, which assesses how it is addressing reinvigoration and the long-term planning for Metro replacements, is currently showing rather too many red indicators for comfort. We also feel obliged to flag up the fact that in relation to buses, Nexus and the combined authorities in recent times have gone down what can only be described as a dead end in respect of its determination to pursue a quality contract scheme against the better judgment of many. This high-risk approach has waited several years and several £1 million of public money, much of it in legal fees. At the time, the opposition on the ITA encouraged Nexus to have a plan B. We encouraged greater exploration of a voluntary partnership agreement with bus operators to secure improvements to ticketing, to pricing, scheduling, investment in new buses and real-time information at bus stops. Those improvements could have been in place by now. Instead, Nexus has had to go back to the drawing board, and to make matters worse, the failure of the QCS approach is almost certainly going to lead to a reduction in funding for bus services at a time when districts are already reducing the transport levy. It is highly likely this will lead to a reduction in subsidised bus services in the not-too-distant futures. All this could have been avoided if Nexus and NECA had adopted a more pragmatic approach. On this too, it is important we feel that NICA's transport lead and senior officers are accountable for rectifying what has been an expensive failure. It's no secret that we on this side are critical of governance arrangements which perhaps place too much power in the hands of what is effectively a single-party system, although it was encouraging to see at least 2 councillors on the Tyne and Wear NECA Transport Subcommittee pressing Nexus and Network Rail last week, particularly the well-respected Gladys Hobson of South Tyneside, who is understandably distraught at the problems being faced by her constituents. And speaking of South Tyneside, no less a figure than Labour's Shadow Northern Powerhouse Minister has also today joined in the calls for those responsible to take urgent action. As public representatives, we have a duty to hold those in power to account and challenge poor performance. We would be letting down thousands of unhappy and disgruntled passengers if we did not do so. Current performance levels are a legitimate concern. The future operation of the metro system is a concern. The future of the Tyne and Wear bus network is a concern. The performance of Nexus in respect to strategic risk is a concern. We are calling on senior NICA members and senior officers to take urgent action to address this situation. This is a key test for the credibility of the combined authority. If we cannot hold you to account to improve a deteriorating public transport system, why do we trust you to take greater power and responsibility on other matters, particularly when performance and employment and apprenticeships is already lagging behind other regions? Other regions are getting on with the job. Under Councillor Forbes and the NECA, we are literally being left standing on the platform. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Harrod.
Formally second, Lord Mayor, and reserve the right to speak.
Councillor Forbes.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. This motion says a great deal about Councillor Stone's personality. It is rambling and incoherent. It covers important issues like the metro, the future of bus services, future transport policy and issues of accountability, but in a shotgun way that are scattered around, phrases just thrown out in the motion without any coherence to it at all. And we've just heard yet another rambling speech from a rambling politician that makes no sense to us whatsoever. Secondly, he's out of step with his colleagues. He opposes the regulation of buses. This puts him at odds with many of his Lib Dem colleagues. Former leader of this council, Lord Shipley, said in the House of Lords, "We should note that franchising of services, with the public sector specifying and regulating and the private sector delivering, is now the norm in the rest of public transport provision in Britain and across Europe. It is time that it became the norm with our bus services." But it wasn't just Lord Shipley who thought that we could introduce quality contracts. Somebody called Greg Holland, who apparently is a Lib Dem MP, I have to say, had to look him up, a Lib Dem MP, one of the 8 remaining Lib Dem MPs, who happens to be their spokesperson in Parliament, has been calling for quality contract schemes since 2005 and welcomed the submission of our scheme here in Tyne and Wear. Lib Dems in the core cities, what few there are left in the core cities, have also been calling for quality contracts to be introduced for bus services. The Liberal Democrats in Bristol, they say, have been working hard over the summer to make the case for both the Mayor and First Group to get on board with bus quality contracts and get things moving. And if that wasn't enough, let's turn to the Liberal Democrat election manifesto, which had a commitment that said, we will support local networks that want to bring forward plans for regulating the bus network in their area. Councillor Stone, you are completely out of touch with all of your colleagues. Let's see if the rest of your group tonight are with you or with all the remaining Lib Dems in the country. And not only are you out of step with your colleagues, this motion is in parts offensive and nasty. You have caused great offence to officers of this council and officers of Nexus for your vicious personal attacks on them in this motion and in your speech tonight. And you should apologise for that, because it's perfectly acceptable to have political debate, but it is not acceptable to make personal attacks on officers who cannot respond in political forums. I know that these issues have been raised with you, and yet you repeated them again in your speech tonight. You should be ashamed of yourself, Councillor Stone. And there is no point to this motion whatsoever. There's no resolution for us. There's no recommend that the council does a particular action. It shows that Councillor Stone simply pursues the ramblings of a politician who resorts to attack dog politics. This is a shame. This is a shame because this is a wasted opportunity for us to join together to talk about the kind of transport system we want. We want better, more affordable bus services. We want to see the metro perform well. We want to see it improved. We all want the bus bill to address the current lack of accountability for bus routes and fares. We all wanted to see an integrated transport system here in our region that's the envy of the rest of the world. What a shame that Councillor Stone has squandered the opportunity for us to unite in the council chamber tonight, to put forward our views on behalf of this city. What a shame he's turned this into a political football and meant that we can't make a collective case for public transport. I will continue to lead the fight for better quality public transport, and it's a shame that Councillor Stone is seeking to turn this into a political issue. He should be ashamed of himself, and I urge my colleagues to vote against this motion.
Councillor Taylor. Councillor Taylor. McCarthy. Councillor McCarthy.
Thank you very much, Lord Mayor. Councillor Stone has brought a motion on an issue which is very dear to many of our hearts in this council chamber, and raises some important issues that deserve proper debate. He talks in detail about the work of the Tyne and Wear subcommittee in holding Deutsche Bahn, the people who run the metro system across Tyne and Wear, on our behalf. I'd like to reassure him that the members of the committee, not just the meeting that he attended last week, but actually having checked through what we've done over the last year and beyond, at every single meeting from January last year, there's been a report about the performance of the metro, and particularly we have taken into account individual residents who have asked to be heard at the meetings of the Tyne and Wear subcommittee, because this issue is so important to us all. We've had regular broad performance updates, and have had Sharon, who manages the railway on our behalf, apologising really for the response that they have given. At last week's meeting, as Councillor Stone mentioned, we also had Network Rail The incidents around Network Rail recently, just before and after Christmas, Lord Mayor, specifically affected Sunderland. And so our colleagues in Sunderland were really, really keen to hear from Network Rail what they were planning to do to put that right. In my view, Lord Mayor, the members of the committee, contrary to what Councillor Stone thinks, are doing their job appropriately and professionally in holding people to account. I can't comment on what the Scrutiny Committee for the Combined Authority are undertaking. I'm not sure if it's been picked up there, and maybe some colleague could comment on that. But I think members of the committee are certainly doing everything that they can to ensure that residents' views are heard. I do, like the Leader of Council, Lord Mayor, get really concerned when motions to Council are critical of officers, when officers have no right to reply. Of course, challenges to politicians are very different. On buses, Lord Mayor, the voluntary partnership agreement was available to the bus companies right up to the date of the inspection, and they didn't offer enough to adequately fill the gap, and therefore, unfortunately, we have to work with the government, with the Department for Transport, to try and make sure that the buses bill, alongside the devolution deal that we're currently negotiating, will offer the opportunity for us to manage public transport to meet the needs of our residents. Lord Mayor, I'll finish by saying these are really, really important issues that have been raised. The model that we have set up is about Cabinet and scrutiny. It isn't just for the Cabinet model to undertake that scrutiny role, it is also for scrutiny, and maybe it's time that the Scrutiny Committee of the Combined Authority did something too.
Thank you. Councillor Faulkner.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I thought we had an example from the Leader of the Council, the worst kind of hypocrisy. This was an example of going for the man, trying to divert attention from the real issues that are raised. These are issues that my constituents, our constituents, surely your constituents raise all the time. Users of public transport, users of the metro system. Don't tell me that we can't use this medium, this council chamber, to raise these issues and have a debate. Given the fact that you've emasculated an opposition voice on transport through the new structure that you've set up, when people like Councillor Keating and Councillor Stone were critical friends, real practical contributors to policy development and so on within the previous structure, and now there's no voice for opposition because you just prefer people who press the button and not challenge. So I think it's an appalling statement you made. You should welcome debate. You should welcome opportunities like this. You should welcome the chance to deal with the issues raised, none of which you dealt with. You just poured abuse at Councillor Stone, and I think that's appalling. And tell us where we can raise these issues, if not in the council chamber. I know you don't want too many council meetings. You probably want to restrict the number of motions that people can bring as well. I know exactly what you're up to. I'm sorry if you don't like challenge, but this is challenge, and you've not risen to it. You've failed completely. And isn't it funny, on the very day that we recognise Brendan Foster, the Great North Run, the thing he created, was the prime example of the failure of management, the failure of the company that had been given the contract to manage Metro. Absolute failure. And it took the fact that a motion was brought to this council for you to stir and suddenly think, I better get to the press first before the opposition do. And then you were challenged because on the very programme you were on television about, there was a statement afterwards from the other leaders of the council saying no decision has... No, I won't. Sit down. No decisions have been made yet, is what was said.
Faulkner has made a direct challenge to my actions, and I can assure him that I've been raising these concerns privately with Nexus for at least the last 6 months. So I'd like him to retract those comments, and they are completely unfounded, and... sometimes, Lord Mayor, it's better to do diplomacy behind the scenes, and now, unfortunately, the contract with DB Regio needs to be challenged more publicly. But I can assure Councillor Faulkner and Councillor Stone that this has been done very robustly, both behind the scenes and within the Tyne and Wear subcommittee. So his accusations are false, inaccurate and untrue.
All I can say, Lord Mayor, is how on earth do we know that if these are private discussions? Where is the transparency? Where is the accountability? There is none. There is none, and there ought to be. Freedom of information, there's another prime example of how information is withheld and there's no debate. So I stand by this. I hope my colleagues here will vote and support this motion. And I hope it triggers you all into doing something about what is a deteriorating public transport situation in this area.
Councillor Higgins. Councillor Higgins.
Yes, thank you, Lord Mayor. At this stage of the evening, after a long day at work, I'm not sure that I can drum up the kind of passion, perhaps, of earlier speakers. But I also want to oppose this motion because I do share the Leader of the Council's view that it is mischief-making rather than a serious proposal about public transport this evening. In the past, Councillor Stone, of course, has shown himself to be the self-appointed spokesperson for Stagecoach and the other private operators of public transport. Members will have noted his frequent statements. If I can just finish what I'm saying, Lord Mayor. Members will have noted in the past his frequent statements in the press during the consultation process over quality contracts when he invariably took the side of the private bus operators against the fare-paying members of the public, all of whom, from my experience, supported the introduction of quality contracts. And therefore I stand by my comments, Councillor Faulkner. Deregulation of public transport by a previous Tory government was an undoubted disaster for the travelling public. It put the monopoly of transport in the hands of private companies who put profit for their shareholders before the needs of the community. Quality contracts was a way of challenging this and bringing back the power of public transport to the public and to democratic bodies. It would appear that Councillor Stone, by his comments in the past, didn't share the view that it could be achieved by quality contracts. He speaks about the introduction of voluntary agreements with private transport operators, which in my opinion is akin to asking us to sup with the devil. On numerous occasions, when I have requested that Stagecoach officials and officials from other private bus companies should cooperate with me and attend meetings with the public to discuss contentious transport issues around the West End, they have consistently refused to do so and have sheltered behind Nexus, preferring to let them face the comments and the criticisms of the public. Councillor Stone bemoans the record of the Tyneside metro system and the recent problems that it's faced, and we can't deny those. Well, once again, we have the failings of a private operator. And I was pleased to note in the press recently that the Leader of Council, in his role, has made some announcements about how we will seek to address this and improve it in the future. However, Lord Mayor, it would be remiss of me, on such a subject as the metro, not to say that I wish we residents in the West End of the city had a metro about which we could complain. However, thereby lies another tale. Councillor Stone finally cannot, of course, resist having a swipe at the lead member for public transport on the North East Combined Authorities, who just happens to be Councillor Forbes, the Leader of the Council. I, for one, therefore, would like to commend Councillor Forbes for the manner in which he has raised the profile of public transport as an important regional issue and challenged the inefficiencies of the private operators who are constantly failing in their duties. Possibly at this stage we cannot deliver the complete renationalisation of our public transport system, but maybe if a metro line to the West End of Newcastle is in his gift, this would be an encouraging start for me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Lower.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I do hope that Councillor Higgins, in the fullness of time, considers what he says and does make an apology. I think it's beyond the pale to actually start throwing insults that have no basis in fact across this chamber. We sometimes have this, and it does degrade how this council works. However, I am not here to defend Necker or to listen to music, but as a member of the Scrutiny Committee at Necker, I have to say that this has become one of the biggest issues we've had, and we have had several meetings with Stagecoach and Nexus and Arriva and everyone else talking about what we can do this. I did raise concerns with the Assistant Chief Exec about the last meeting, and I don't think it was any reflection on Councillor Forbes, but we had everyone there, and I've discovered that Councillor Forbes hadn't been invited to come along and give his views. And I do think that that is a remit it's remiss of the committee which is being run through Sunderland for scrutiny, that when you have a meeting in Newcastle of the scrutiny committee discussing transport and the leader of the council is the lead on transport, that they don't bother to ask him to walk along the corridor. I do think that this, I mean, there are only 2 opposition members on the whole of this combined authority, of which I am one. However, I do think that the whole of scrutiny on the combined authority is concerned about this issue. And it's not just a Newcastle issue, it's not just about Nexus, it's about transport over the whole region. And we need to get that reflected. There's been a lot of ill feeling and things said tonight, but the biggest issue we have is getting transport right across the region and making sure that people can get to employment, get to jobs and get there at a fair rate. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Dunham.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I'll not throw any insults around or anything, but there does seem to be an elephant in the room missing from this debate. I mean, we can argue about structures and individuals and what the best possible sort of committee or oversight body is, but it would strike me that the thrust of this motion is the public transport network would be suffering from the continued fiscal policy of cumulative public sector spending restraint. It therefore strikes me of political opportunism of the worst kind for councillors to bring along a motion on this when public services across the entire region and country are going to face this over the next few years, and you pick on the only one on which an individual in this council chamber has any say over.
Councillor Ashby.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. The volume generated in the response really did imply that Councillor Stone had hit on a nerve here, and that really we're not being, the transport undertakings are not being held to account in the way that they should be by NECA or by the leadership on the other side. I call it in evidence that there's great public concern about this. There was, in fact, there's an online story ahead of this meeting, and when I looked at it, 84% of people, the ordinary folks out there, were saying that they were dissatisfied with the level of service being provided by the Metro. And I would just give you one small example. In the good old days when we did have an integrated transport system on Tyneside, which the Metro was designed to be the heart, we had the idea of park and ride. And so the weekend before last, because of the mayhem down the high street through Gosforth, the difficulties of moving up and down there because of the roadworks going on at the moment, and all the adverse impact that is having on local shopkeepers, I decided that I would actually park and ride. And so I drove down to the Regent Centre, and I parked my car there, and I found it was a small amount, a modest amount, £1 to park my car there. I thought, this is good, I like this. Until I started to go down from the level on which I parked my car downstairs. I went down a staircase which was not lit and which smelt. Now, this does not encourage people to go back again. It does not encourage women, people who feel vulnerable, to go down a dark staircase that smells in the middle of the day. When I tweeted this to the Metro, who are supposed to be responding to concerns from members of the public, which I was in this case, the reply came there none. And if they can't do the simple things, then how on earth are they going to do the difficult things? And this is what's key. It's not about the high levels of public spending and grants and all the rest of it. It's about an organisation who do not seem to be able to run a small railway, in a sensible way for the benefits of local people. And really, that is what we should be addressing, and that is what the lead member needs to be addressing, to get the folks that are doing this to do their job correctly, to serve local people who have transport needs.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Cook.
I don't think it's only women that are offended by the smell of urine in dark corridors, Councillor Ashby.
Thanks for that, Councillor Stockier. Councillor Cook.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Whatever this motion does, it brings into stark contrast the disparity of funding in the North East, in London and the South East in transport. And David Wood is sitting in front of me, who'll correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe the figures are for every £5 spent on public transport in the North East, it's £250 in London. And frankly, that's what this is all about.
Thank you, Councillor. We have no more contributors. Could we therefore ask Councillor Stone to respond?
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Does Councillor Huddard wish to? She has reserved the right to speak, I believe, so she may.
Councillor Huddard has reserved the right to speak. Formally.
I formally seconded and reserved the right to speak, Lord Mayor.
One or the other.
Sorry? Oh, sorry. My mistake. Sorry. I hadn't intended to say very much at all, but I think Councillor Ashby's right, that this motion's clearly hit an open nerve. My goodness, we're being accused of mischief making, as opposed to looking constructively at criticism of an issue of local concern. Everybody in the North East deserves a decent transport system. We used to be proud that we had an integrated transport system. I would still like to have one. And I have actually done what Councillor Ashby, I didn't know he was going to raise this, been in that car park at the Regent Centre and gone down those staircases smelly and dark, and I wouldn't do it again, in fact. All I would say is for many years, while we had a Labour government, some of us waited for the promised revision of deregulation, and it never happened. And now it's too late. The political scenario has moved on, as has time, and it's not going to happen. But I do want to see us all working together about improving our local transport. And I presume that's why the leader went on TV the other day, because he was also concerned. We'd like him to share his concerns with us and tell us about ways that we can all work together on it, rather than acting in the way he did. My first thought was, methinks the leader doth protest too much. So obviously the nerve that was hit was one of his.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Stone, right to reply.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. It was a rather ranting and rather offensive response from Councillor Forbes, which frankly demeaned him and demeans his office as Leader of the Council and NECA lead member. It's a pity that he chose to play the man. He did not choose to play the issue. He had nothing to say about the issue. He only had views about me. It may be inconvenient to Councillor Forbes that I am seeking to hold him and his officers to account, but in doing so I am standing up for thousands and thousands of passengers who are not happy with performance, and I am not...
Can Councillor Stone say what he means by my officers? I don't have any officers. There are officers employed by the City Council, there are officers employed by Nexus, but I do not have any officers.
I will clarify my comments by saying we're referring to the North East Combined Authority's Chief Office, Lead Officer for Transport, who I believe has a close relationship with Councillor Forbes. And I also was referring those comments to the head of public passenger transport operations at the North East Combined Authority. And I also understand there have been some cosy private backroom chats between him and Councillor Forbes in recent weeks. I am standing up for thousands and thousands of unhappy passengers.
Because I find it deeply offensive,
I will
like
come
much
on
of
to
what
that
he
if you let
says.
me finish, Lord Mayor. I will come on to that if you let me finish.
Continue.
I'm standing up for thousands and thousands of disgruntled passengers. I'm standing up for the 84% that Councillor Ashby referred to who think they are serious problems with passenger transport at the moment. Councillor Forbes had nothing to say about what he will do to respond to the problems of Metro at present, nothing to say about what he will do in terms of the long-term investment process in Metro, nothing to say about what he's going to do about bus franchising and the bus bill when it arrives. I gather that I am perhaps not popular at present at Nexus House for challenging the operational and strategic performance of the organisation, but I believe it is my job to scrutinise them. I was doing that effectively as a member of the Integrated Transport Authority before it was abolished. I now have to direct my scrutiny and my concerns in this forum, and I'm happy to do that. I believe it is my job to point out the flaws of Nexus's QCS scheme. Other areas of the country may well set out more appropriate QCS arrangements, less risky QCS arrangements, more sensible QCS arrangements, but unfortunately the North East chose not to do that. I would like to clarify my criticism of Nexus and the North East Combined Authority. I have had a face-to-face, man-to-man conversation about this recently with the head of Nexus, but I reject completely the suggestion that I'm attacking officers. I'm holding them to account for performance. I'm man-to-man, I'm talking about Tobin actually here on that particular one. I'm holding them to account for performance, and I hold you, Councillor Forbes, ultimately responding for securing performance improvement. Cosy, behind-the-scenes chats are one thing. It is right and proper we hold you personally to account in public, in this chamber, in a democratic way, and I make no apology at all for doing tonight. I would like to close by referring members of this council to the Sort Out the Metro Facebook group, which has thousands of users. They are reporting daily, hourly, about how unhappy they are with the service. I will speak up for them, this side will speak up for them, that side over there, and the Leader of Council has just given me a nothing but personal abuse, and he should be ashamed of himself. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Thank you, colleagues. Could we now go to the vote? Has everyone voted? The substantial motion has been lost. 37 to 18. Thank you. As it is now 8:13, the guillotine has fallen, and so we need to deal with the remaining items of business in accordance with Standing Order 19. For which the remaining item asks the mover whether they want, this is what I'm going to ask the movers, if they want to be dealt with now, or we need a seconder. So we would be asking you if you want to deal with it now or be put forward to the next full City Council. Councillor Bowman.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I'd like the motion dealt with now, please.
Right. Do you have a seconder?
Seconded, Lord Mayor.
Thank you. Do we need to vote on this motion? Great. Councillor Strather? Could we go to the vote in that case? I'm getting different voices from... Thank you. Councillor Strather. Do you have a seconder? Thank you. Is it accepted? Great. Councillor Powers?
This government's tax on stone and students, Lord Mayor, so either way side and stand up for them. I think we should go to the vote on the substantial motion, and colleagues should reject the amendment.
Got your seconder?
Please may I have a named vote on this item?
Very good.
I mean, 10 members...
Who's, you never mentioned who's seconded?
Yes, Lord Mayor, I'd like to propose the amendment as in...
Right, could we vote on... Could we vote on the amendment, please? Ring the bell, please. We are voting on the amendment. Councillor Davis. Can we now vote on the amendment? The amendment is lost, 35-18. Councillor Davis. Is the main motion accepted? Agreed. Great, thank you. Councillor Powers? It's all right, thank you. You asked for a named vote. You're happy to accept that, are you? Right, thank you. Could I formally close this meeting? Thank you.
In future, we're going to have to give you the proper names.
Got names of people who put their names. Oh.
We go.